Welcome to this comprehensive examination of one of the most significant consumer-driven transformations in digital entertainment history. As we sit here in 2035, it's remarkable to reflect on how dramatically our gaming landscape has evolved over the past decade. Tonight, we'll embark on a thorough exploration of what historians now call the Great Microtransaction Correction. A period of fundamental change that reshaped not just how games are monetized, but how we think about digital consumer rights, psychological manipulation in software design, and the relationship between entertainment companies and their audiences. If you enjoy this type of content, a like or a subscription is always appreciated. It helps our small corner of the internet grow. I invite you to share your own thoughts in the comments below. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we must first transport ourselves back to the gaming environment of 2025. Picture, if you will, a digital entertainment ecosystem that had grown increasingly complex and, many would argue, predatory in its approach to extracting value from players. This was an era when the average mobile game contained what researchers would later identify as dozens of psychological manipulation techniques, designed not to enhance enjoyment, but to maximize spending through carefully calibrated systems of artificial scarcity, variable reward schedules, and social pressure mechanisms. The gaming industry of 2025 was characterized by what economists term dark pattern monetization. User interface designs and game mechanics specifically engineered to confuse, coerce, or deceive players into spending money. Loot boxes, those digital containers offering randomized rewards for real money, had become so prevalent that they generated over $47 billion globally that year alone. These systems operated on principles borrowed from casino gaming, utilizing what behavioral psychologists recognized as operant conditioning schedules designed to create and maintain addictive spending patterns. Consider the typical mobile gaming experience of 2025. A player would download what appeared to be a free game, only to discover that meaningful progress required either extensive waiting periods, sometimes measured in days or weeks, or financial investment to bypass these artificially imposed delays. Games employed multiple virtual currencies, deliberately confusing pricing structures that obscured the real money cost of digital items. Social features were weaponized to create fear of missing out, with limited time offers and competitive elements designed to pressure spending decisions. The psychological sophistication of these systems was remarkable and troubling in equal measure. Game developers employed teams of behavioral economists, addiction specialists, and data scientists to optimize what they euphemistically called player engagement, but what critics more accurately described as spending compulsion. Every aspect of the user experience was measured, analyzed, and iteratively refined to increase what the industry termed lifetime value, the total amount of money a player could be convinced to spend over their relationship with a game. This period also saw the emergence of what researchers called whale hunting, the deliberate targeting of vulnerable individuals who exhibited signs of compulsive spending behavior. Industry documents later revealed that a small percentage of players, often those struggling with addiction, gambling problems, or mental health issues, generated the majority of revenue for many games. Rather than recognizing this as a problem, many companies refined their systems to more effectively identify and exploit these vulnerable populations. The rating systems of 2025 provided little protection for consumers. Games with extensive gambling-like mechanics received age ratings suitable for children, as long as the virtual items won through loot boxes couldn't be directly converted back to real money. This technical distinction masked the reality that these systems trained young minds in gambling behaviors and normalized the association between gameplay rewards and financial expenditure. Furthermore, The sheer ubiquity of these practices meant that finding games without exploitative monetization had become genuinely difficult. Even traditionally premium games, those sold for a one-time purchase price, increasingly incorporated additional monetization layers, subscription services, and downloadable content designed to extract ongoing revenue streams from players who had already paid full price for the base experience. The social dynamics within gaming communities reflected this monetization environment. Players were segregated into implicit classes based on their willingness or ability to spend money, with free-to-play participants often relegated to inferior experiences designed to showcase the advantages available to paying customers. This created social pressure and feelings of inadequacy that went far beyond the boundaries of the games themselves. As we'll explore in subsequent segments of tonight's discussion, this ecosystem of 2025 contained the seeds of its own transformation. The very sophistication and pervasiveness of these exploitative practices would ultimately galvanize a consumer response of unprecedented scale and effectiveness. But to understand how we arrived at our current state of ethical, transparent, and genuinely enjoyable gaming in 2035, we must first fully appreciate the depth and complexity of the challenges that consumers, advocates, and even ethical developers faced during that pivotal decade. The year 2025 represents the high watermark of predatory gaming monetization, the moment when these practices reached their maximum sophistication and market penetration. Just before the tide of consumer awareness and regulatory response began to turn, the transformation that would eventually reshape the entire gaming industry didn't emerge suddenly or without warning. Rather, it grew from a steadily accumulating body of academic research, investigative journalism, and grassroots consumer advocacy that had been building throughout the early 2020s. By 2025, this foundation of awareness had reached a critical mass that would soon catalyze unprecedented change. The academic community played a particularly crucial role in legitimizing concerns about gaming monetization practices. Dr. Elena Vasquez at the University of California, Berkeley, published groundbreaking research in 2024 that definitively established the neurological similarities between loot box purchasing and traditional gambling behaviors. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, her team demonstrated that the same brain regions associated with gambling addiction showed identical activation patterns when subjects engaged with randomized digital reward systems in games. This research was part of a broader scholarly movement that had been gaining momentum since the early 2020s. The Journal of Digital Ethics, established in 2023, became a central repository for peer-reviewed studies examining the psychological and social impacts of modern gaming monetization. Dr. James Chen's longitudinal study, which tracked the spending habits and psychological well-being of over 10,000 mobile game players across 3 years, revealed disturbing correlations between certain game mechanics and the development of compulsive spending behaviors, particularly among young adults and adolescents. Perhaps most significantly, the academic community began developing standardized frameworks for identifying and categorizing what they termed exploitative design patterns in digital entertainment. The Haverford classification system, introduced by Dr. Sarah Mitchell in late 2024, provided researchers, regulators, and advocates with a common vocabulary for discussing predatory game mechanics. This system identified 12 distinct categories of psychological manipulation commonly employed in games, from artificial scarcity and variable ratio reinforcement to social debt and loss aversion exploitation. Simultaneously, consumer advocacy groups were evolving from scattered online complaints into organized, sophisticated organizations capable of influencing policy and public opinion. The Coalition for Ethical Gaming, founded by former addiction counselor Marcus Rodriguez in 2024, grew from a small support group for problem gamblers affected by gaming monetization into an international advocacy network with chapters across North America, Europe, and Asia. These advocacy groups employed increasingly sophisticated strategies to raise awareness about predatory gaming practices. Rather than simply complaining about individual games or companies, they focused on systemic issues and policy solutions. The Dark Pattern Documentation Project, launched in early 2025, created comprehensive databases of exploitative design patterns found in popular games, complete with screenshots, psychological analysis, and estimated costs to players. This project became an invaluable resource for journalists, researchers, and ultimately, regulators seeking to understand the scope and sophistication of the problem. The advocacy movement also benefited from the participation of industry insiders who grew uncomfortable with the direction their profession had taken. The Ethical Developers Alliance, formed by programmers, designers, and artists working within major gaming companies, provided insider perspective on how exploitative systems were designed and implemented. Their anonymous testimonials, shared through secure channels, revealed the internal debates and moral compromises that had become commonplace in game development studios. One particularly influential figure was former mobile game designer Alex Kim, who had worked on several highly profitable games before experiencing what he later described as a moral crisis about his profession. Kim's detailed blog posts published under the pseudonym Recovering Game Dev provided unprecedented insight into the specific techniques used to manipulate player behavior. His post titled, "How We Made You Spend: Confessions from Inside the Addiction Economy," went viral in early 2025, attracting millions of views and sparking widespread discussion about the ethics of game design. The media landscape of 2025 was also becoming more receptive to in-depth coverage of gaming industry practices. Investigative journalists like Maria Santos at the Washington Tech Review and David Chen at Digital Rights Today began treating gaming monetization as a serious consumer protection issue rather than a niche hobby concern. Their reporting revealed the sophisticated data collection and behavioral analysis systems that companies used to optimize player spending, often comparing these practices to those employed by casinos and other gambling establishments. International awareness was growing as well. The European Digital Rights Foundation published influential reports documenting the prevalence of gambling-like mechanics in games marketed to children. The Australian Centre for Responsible Technology conducted studies showing correlations between problematic gaming monetization and household debt in vulnerable populations. These international perspectives helped frame gaming monetization as a global consumer protection issue rather than a regional concern. Perhaps most importantly, the advocacy movement of this period began developing concrete policy proposals rather than simply identifying problems. The Fair Gaming Standards Initiative, launched jointly by several advocacy groups in mid-2025, proposed comprehensive frameworks for regulating gaming monetization, including transparency requirements, spending limits, and age restrictions. These proposals would later serve as templates for the regulatory responses that would emerge in subsequent years. The convergence of academic research, grassroots advocacy, insider revelations, and investigative journalism created an intellectual and social foundation that legitimized concerns about gaming monetization practices. By late 2025, these formerly disparate voices had begun to coalesce into a coherent movement with shared goals, common vocabularies, and increasingly sophisticated strategies for creating change. This period of growing awareness set the stage for the more dramatic events that would follow, as consumer consciousness reached levels that could no longer be ignored by industry executives, policymakers, or the media establishment. As 2026 dawned, the growing chorus of academic research and consumer advocacy began attracting serious attention from government bodies around the world. This marked a crucial transition from grassroots awareness to institutional recognition of gaming monetization as a legitimate consumer protection issue. The response from government entities was initially cautious but increasingly assertive, as evidence mounted regarding the scope and impact of predatory gaming practices. The first significant governmental intervention came from the Belgian Gaming Commission, which had been investigating loot boxes since 2018, but had faced limited enforcement capabilities due to the international nature of digital distribution. In early 2026, the Commission published an expanded report that utilized the growing body of academic research to make a compelling case for treating certain gaming monetization practices as forms of illegal gambling. This report, meticulously documented and soberly presented, provided a template for regulatory agencies in other jurisdictions. The European Union's response was characteristically systematic and comprehensive. The Digital Services Consumer Protection Directive, introduced in the European Parliament in March 2026, proposed harmonized standards for gaming monetization across all member states. The directive incorporated many of the recommendations that had emerged from advocacy groups and academic research, including requirements for transparent pricing, mandatory cooling-off periods for large purchases, and restrictions on marketing gambling-like mechanics to minors. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission began conducting formal hearings on gaming monetization practices. These hearings, which lasted throughout the spring and summer of 2026, featured testimony from researchers, advocates, industry representatives, and affected consumers. The contrast between academic presentations documenting psychological manipulation and industry representatives defending their practices as player choice created compelling public theater that attracted significant media attention. State-level action in the United States proved even more aggressive than federal efforts. The California state legislature introduced the Digital Consumer Protection Act, which proposed treating loot boxes as a form of gambling subject to existing gaming regulations. Similar legislation emerged in New York, Massachusetts, and Washington state, creating the possibility of a patchwork of conflicting regulations that made industry representatives increasingly nervous about the trajectory of policy development. The industry's response to this growing regulatory attention revealed both the sophistication of their defensive strategies and the internal divisions that would eventually contribute to the transformation of their business models. The Entertainment Software Association, the primary lobbying organization for the gaming industry, commissioned extensive studies intended to contradict academic research about gambling-like mechanics in games. These industry-funded studies, while methodologically competent, consistently reached conclusions that minimized concerns about player harm and emphasized the benefits of current monetization models. Major gaming companies also invested heavily in public relations campaigns designed to reframe the narrative around their monetization practices. Electronic Arts, Activision Blizzard, and other large publishers coordinated messaging that emphasized player choice, value delivery, and the necessity of ongoing revenue streams to support live game services. Their arguments, while superficially reasonable, increasingly appeared defensive and disconnected from the lived experiences of players and the growing body of independent research. Perhaps more significantly, the industry began implementing what critics characterized as regulatory theater, superficial changes designed to address the most obvious concerns while preserving the fundamental structures that drove revenue. Many companies introduced voluntary spending limits, modified user interfaces to provide clearer pricing information, and enhanced parental controls. While these changes represented genuine improvements for some players, Advocacy groups and researchers argued that they failed to address the core psychological manipulation techniques that made gaming monetization problematic. The internal divisions within the gaming industry became increasingly apparent during this period. Smaller developers and indie studios, many of whom had never embraced exploitative monetization practices, began publicly supporting regulatory efforts. These developers argued that regulation would level the playing field by preventing larger companies from using psychological manipulation to gain competitive advantages. Even within major gaming companies, internal dissent was growing. The Ethical Developers Alliance reported increasing membership and more frequent internal discussions about the moral implications of current industry practices. Several high-profile resignations occurred during 2026 as talented developers left major studios citing ethical concerns about their work's impact on players. The international nature of the gaming industry created additional complexity for both regulators and companies. Games developed in one country but distributed globally through digital platforms created jurisdictional challenges that existing regulatory frameworks weren't designed to handle. This complexity became both an obstacle for advocates seeking consistent protection and an opportunity for creative regulatory solutions that would emerge in subsequent years. One particularly significant development was the emergence of age verification requirements in several jurisdictions. The United Kingdom's implementation of robust age verification for games containing gambling-like mechanics created the first practical test of how such regulations might work in practice. While the system faced initial technical challenges and industry resistance, it demonstrated that meaningful restrictions on problematic content were technically feasible. The economic stakes of potential regulation were enormous, with billions of dollars in annual revenue dependent on monetization models that regulatory bodies were increasingly questioning. This created powerful incentives for industry resistance while simultaneously making regulatory success potentially transformative for player experiences. By the end of 2026, battle lines had been clearly drawn between advocates and regulators on one side and industry representatives on the other. However, the most significant changes were yet to come, as events in 2027 would provide the catalyst needed to transform growing regulatory interest into concrete, enforceable policies that would reshape the entire industry. The stage was set for confrontation, but the specific events that would trigger the Great Correction remain months away, building tension and anticipation among all stakeholders in the gaming ecosystem. The transformation of gaming monetization from a niche, regulatory concern to a major public policy issue required catalyzing events that could capture public attention and crystallize years of growing awareness into decisive action. These events, which unfolded throughout 2027, provided the emotional and political momentum necessary to overcome industry resistance and implement meaningful reform. The first major catalyst came in February 2027, with what media outlets dubbed the Minecraft Children's Crisis. A detailed investigation by The Guardian revealed that a popular Minecraft server network had been specifically targeting children aged 8 to 12, with sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed to encourage spending on virtual items. The investigation, based on leaked internal documents and interviews with former employees, revealed that the company had employed child psychologists to optimize their monetization systems for maximum effectiveness on developing minds. What made this story particularly powerful was its focus on a gaming franchise that many parents considered safe and educational. The revelation that children were being subjected to casino-style psychological manipulation while parents believed they were engaged in creative, educational play created a profound sense of betrayal among families worldwide. The story featured heart-wrenching interviews with parents who discovered their children had spent hundreds or thousands of dollars without understanding the real-world cost of their virtual purchases. The second catalyst emerged from an unexpected source. A peer-reviewed study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that definitively linked problematic gaming monetization to increased rates of anxiety and depression among teenagers. Dr. Rebecca Walsh's longitudinal study, which tracked over 5,000 adolescents for 3 years, found statistically significant correlations between exposure to loot box mechanics and the development of anxiety disorders, even after controlling for other risk factors. This medical research provided scientific legitimacy that transformed gaming monetization from a consumer protection issue into a public health concern. The study's findings were particularly compelling because they demonstrated harm beyond financial exploitation, showing that the psychological techniques used in games were contributing to genuine mental health problems among young people. The third and perhaps most significant catalyst was the Sunset Studios scandal that broke in July 2027. Sunset Studios, a mid-sized mobile game developer, suffered a massive data breach that exposed internal communications, revealing the extent to which the company deliberately targeted vulnerable individuals for aggressive monetization. The leaked documents included detailed psychological profiles of high-spending players, many of whom showed clear signs of addiction, gambling problems, or mental health issues. Most damaging were email chains between executives celebrating their success in extracting money from players they internally referred to as problem whales. Individuals whose spending patterns clearly indicated compulsive behavior. One particularly disturbing exchange discussed strategies for identifying players going through divorces, job losses, or other life crises, as these individuals were found to be more susceptible to spending manipulation. The Sunset Studios documents also revealed sophisticated artificial intelligence systems designed to personalize psychological pressure based on individual player vulnerabilities. The company had developed algorithms that could identify players likely to be struggling financially and then target them with more aggressive monetization tactics during moments of perceived weakness. The public reaction to these revelations was swift and intense. Social media platforms filled with personal stories from individuals and families who recognized their own experiences in the leaked documents. The hashtag gaming harm trended globally for weeks, creating a forum for millions of people to share stories about problematic spending, family conflicts, and psychological manipulation in games. Perhaps most significantly, these personal stories began to reach mainstream media outlets and political figures who had previously been unaware of the scope of the problem. Television news programs featured segments on families bankrupted by mobile game spending, and newspaper editorials compared gaming companies to tobacco companies in their willingness to profit from addiction and vulnerable populations. The political response was immediate and bipartisan. In the United States, Senator Elizabeth Warren called for congressional hearings on predatory gaming practices, while across the aisle, Senator Josh Hawley introduced legislation that would ban loot boxes in games accessible to minors. In the United Kingdom, Parliament scheduled emergency debates on digital consumer protection, and the Prime Minister publicly committed to protecting British children from digital exploitation. The European Union accelerated its legislative timeline, fast-tracking the Digital Services Consumer Protection Directive in response to public pressure. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described gaming monetization practices as digital colonialism that exploited psychological vulnerabilities for corporate profit. Industry representatives found themselves increasingly isolated as public opinion shifted decisively against current monetization practices. Stock prices for major gaming companies began declining as investors worried about potential regulatory impacts and consumer backlash. Several companies attempted to implement voluntary reforms, but these efforts were widely perceived as insufficient given the scope of documented problems. The catalyst events of 2027 also energized advocacy groups and researchers who found themselves with unprecedented platforms to share their work and policy recommendations. The Coalition for Ethical Gaming reported a tenfold increase in membership during the second half of 2027, while academic conferences on digital ethics were oversubscribed, with researchers eager to contribute to policy discussions. International coordination among advocacy groups also accelerated during this period. The formation of the Global Alliance for Digital Consumer Protection created a unified voice for reform advocates worldwide, enabling coordinated responses to industry arguments and consistent policy recommendations across different jurisdictions. By the end of 2027, the political and social landscape surrounding gaming monetization had been fundamentally transformed. What had been a niche concern among researchers and advocates had become a mainstream political issue, with broad public support for reform. The stage was set for the regulatory and industry responses that would define 2028 as the beginning of the Great Correction itself. The catalyst events of 2027 demonstrate how accumulated awareness can suddenly crystallize into decisive political action when the right combination of evidence, personal stories, and moral clarity converge to overcome entrenched interests and create momentum for systemic change. The momentum generated by the catalyst events of 2027 created an unprecedented opportunity for international regulatory coordination. Recognizing that the global nature of digital game distribution required a harmonized response, regulatory bodies from around the world began working toward unified standards that would prevent companies from simply relocating their operations to avoid oversight. The initiative for international coordination came from an unexpected source: the World Health Organization. In January 2028, WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus announced that the organization would convene an emergency session on digital addiction and psychological manipulation in entertainment software. This announcement elevated gaming monetization from a consumer protection issue to a global health concern, providing the institutional framework necessary for meaningful international cooperation. The WHO's involvement was particularly significant because it provided scientific credibility and moral authority that transcended national political considerations. Dr. Tedros framed the issue in public health terms, arguing that the psychological manipulation techniques employed in games represented a form of digital pollution that was contributing to rising rates of anxiety, depression, and addictive behaviors worldwide. The Brussels Gaming Accords, as they came to be known, were negotiated during an intensive 3-week session in March 2028. Representatives from 47 countries participated in discussions that were simultaneously technical, legal, and deeply philosophical. The challenge was creating standards that were specific enough to be enforceable while flexible enough to accommodate different legal systems and cultural contexts. The negotiations were facilitated by the European Union, which had the most advanced regulatory framework for digital consumer protection. However, the final accords represented genuine compromise and collaboration rather than European preferences imposed on other participants. Key negotiating blocs included the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and a coalition of developing nations led by Brazil and India. The technical working groups that supported the negotiations produced remarkably detailed standards for identifying and regulating problematic gaming monetization practices. These standards built heavily on the academic research and advocacy work that had been developing for years, particularly the Haverford classification system for exploitative design patterns. The final accords established several key principles that would govern gaming monetization internationally. First, the transparency principle required that all real money costs be clearly displayed in the currency of the player's location, with no obfuscation through virtual currencies or complex conversion systems. Games were required to display total spending amounts prominently and provide detailed spending histories to players upon request. Second, the vulnerability protection principle banned the targeting of psychological manipulation techniques toward minors and required companies to implement systems for identifying and protecting vulnerable adult players. This principle proved controversial during negotiations, as industry representatives argued that such requirements were technically impossible to implement. However, advocacy groups and regulators pointed to existing technology used for fraud detection and argued that similar systems could be adapted for consumer protection. Third, the fair odds principle required that any randomized reward systems disclose exact probability rates for all possible outcomes. More significantly, it banned the use of dynamic odds systems that adjusted probabilities based on player behavior or spending history. This provision directly addressed one of the most manipulative practices revealed in the Sunset Studios documents. Fourth, the cooling-off principle mandated waiting periods for significant purchases and required that players confirm their spending decisions through separate authentication methods. This principle was designed to prevent impulsive spending decisions and give players time to reconsider large expenditures. The enforcement mechanisms established by the accords were perhaps more significant than the standards themselves. The agreement created the International Digital Consumer Protection Authority, IDCPA, a new international body with the power to investigate complaints, coordinate enforcement actions, and impose penalties on companies that violated the agreed standards. The IDCPA was granted several innovative enforcement tools that reflected the global nature of digital distribution. The organization could require app stores and digital distribution platforms to remove non-compliant games from their platforms, effectively cutting off access to global markets for companies that refused to comply with the standards. Additionally, the IDCPA could coordinate financial penalties across multiple jurisdictions, preventing companies from treating fines in individual countries as merely a cost of doing business. The accords also established a unique funding mechanism for ongoing oversight. Companies that operated games with monetary transactions were required to contribute to a global digital consumer protection fund based on their revenue from such transactions. This fund would support the IDCPA's operations, fund independent research on digital consumer protection, and provide resources for consumer education and advocacy. Perhaps most importantly, the accords created a framework for ongoing collaboration and adaptation. The standards would be reviewed and updated annually based on emerging research, technological developments, and practical experience with enforcement. This built-in flexibility was crucial for maintaining relevance in a rapidly evolving industry. The industry response to the Brussels Gaming Accords was mixed but generally resigned. Major companies had been anticipating significant regulatory changes since the catalyst events of 2027, and many executives privately acknowledged that the international standards were more reasonable than some of the national legislation that had been proposed in various jurisdictions. However, the accords also faced significant implementation challenges. The technical requirements for compliance were complex and expensive, particularly for smaller developers who lacked the resources to implement sophisticated consumer protection systems. Critics argued that the regulations would favor large companies that could afford compliance costs while disadvantaging innovative smaller developers. The signing ceremony for the Brussels Gaming Accords on April 15, 2028, marked a historic moment in international regulatory cooperation. For the first time, the global community had agreed on comprehensive standards for protecting consumers in digital entertainment environments. The accords would take effect on January 1, 2029, giving companies 8 months to modify their systems and practices to comply with the new requirements. As we'll explore in subsequent segments, the period between the signing of the accords and their implementation became a time of intense innovation and adaptation within the gaming industry. As companies worked to develop new business models that could provide sustainable revenue while respecting consumer protection principles. The 8-month period between the signing of the Brussels Gaming Accords in April 2028 and their implementation on January 1, 2029, witnessed the most rapid and comprehensive transformation in gaming industry practices since the emergence of digital distribution. This period, which industry historians now call the emergency adaptation, saw companies scrambling to redesign their business models, retool their games, and develop entirely new approaches to player engagement and monetization. The initial industry response was characterized by panic and uncertainty. Stock prices for major gaming companies experienced significant volatility as investors struggled to assess the financial impact of compliance requirements. Many companies faced the prospect of completely rebuilding their most profitable games, as existing monetization systems were fundamentally incompatible with the transparency and consumer protection requirements of the new international standards. Electronic Arts, one of the largest gaming companies globally, provides an instructive case study of this adaptation process. The company's financial filings from mid-2028 revealed that over 60% of their revenue came from monetization practices that would be prohibited under the new standards. CEO Andrew Wilson announced a comprehensive business model transformation initiative that would require restructuring virtually every aspect of the company's operations. The technical challenges of compliance were immense. Games that had been designed around obfuscated pricing, variable odds, and psychological manipulation techniques needed to be fundamentally restructured. This wasn't simply a matter of changing user interfaces or adjusting mathematical formulas. It required rethinking the core gameplay loops that had been optimized for revenue extraction rather than player enjoyment. Many companies discovered that their existing games became significantly less profitable when subjected to transparency requirements and fair odds disclosure. Internal industry documents later revealed that some lootbox systems had been using dynamic probability adjustments that made certain rewards effectively impossible for players who hadn't spent significant amounts of money. When these systems were replaced with static, disclosed odds, the psychological effectiveness of the monetization diminished substantially. The adaptation period also revealed the extent to which the industry had become dependent on psychological manipulation for revenue generation. Companies found that when they removed artificial scarcity, social pressure mechanics, and variable reward schedules, player engagement patterns changed dramatically. Many players, freed from manipulative design patterns, began spending less time and money on games, but reported higher satisfaction with their gaming experiences. However, the adaptation period also sparked remarkable innovation in ethical monetization models. Companies that had previously relied on exploitative practices were forced to develop new approaches that could generate revenue while providing genuine value to players. This constraint, while initially seen as a limitation, ultimately drove creativity and led to business models that proved more sustainable in the long term. The subscription model experienced a renaissance during this period. as companies realized that predictable, transparent pricing could provide stable revenue streams while building stronger relationships with players. Netflix-style gaming subscriptions emerged as a popular alternative to individual game purchases or microtransactions, allowing players access to libraries of games for fixed monthly fees. Some companies pioneered ethical premium models that charged higher upfront prices for games but included all content without additional payments. These models proved particularly successful for companies that could demonstrate the superior quality and completeness of their products compared to games designed around ongoing monetization. The cosmetic customization market also evolved significantly during this period. Companies found that players were willing to pay for personalization options and aesthetic enhancements, but only when these items were priced transparently and offered genuine value. The new standards requiring clear pricing in local currency revealed that many cosmetic items had been dramatically overpriced when hidden behind virtual currency systems. Indie developers and smaller studios often found themselves at an advantage during the adaptation period. Many of these companies had never embraced exploitative monetization practices, meaning they required fewer changes to comply with new standards. Some indie developers reported increased market opportunities as major publishers struggled with compliance, creating space for smaller competitors to gain market share. The international coordination required by the Brussels Gaming Accords also drove technological innovation. Companies needed to develop systems that could simultaneously comply with different regulatory requirements across multiple jurisdictions while providing consistent user experiences. This led to the development of sophisticated compliance management platforms that could adapt game behavior based on player location and local regulations. Perhaps most significantly, the adaptation period saw the emergence of new metrics for measuring game success. Companies began shifting away from lifetime value and revenue per user metrics that had driven exploitative design toward player satisfaction, retention through enjoyment, and fair value exchange measurements that better aligned with sustainable business practices. The role of data analytics also evolved during this period. While companies had previously used player data primarily to optimize spending behavior, the new environment required analytics focused on identifying and preventing problematic usage patterns. Companies developed sophisticated systems for detecting signs of addictive or compulsive spending and implementing protective interventions. Employee morale within gaming companies generally improved during the adaptation period, as developers found themselves working on projects they could be proud of, rather than systems designed to exploit players. The Ethical Developers Alliance reported that job satisfaction surveys showed significant improvements as companies shifted toward more ethical business practices. However, the adaptation period was not without casualties. Some companies, particularly those that had been entirely dependent on exploitative monetization models, faced severe financial difficulties. Several mobile game publishers declared bankruptcy when they proved unable to develop viable alternatives to their previous business models. By late 2028, it became clear that the gaming industry would emerge from the adaptation period fundamentally transformed. Companies that successfully navigated the transition were discovering that ethical business practices could be not only sustainable, but more profitable in the long term, as they built stronger relationships with players and avoided the reputational risks associated with exploitative practices. The stage was set for January 1, 2029, the official implementation date of the Brussels Gaming Accords, and the beginning of what would become known as the Great Correction itself. January 1, 2029, marked one of the most significant regulatory transitions in digital entertainment history. As the Brussels Gaming Accords officially took effect, across 47 participating countries, representing over 70% of global gaming revenue. The industry experienced what many observers described as its most transformative day since the emergence of home video gaming consoles. The International Digital Consumer Protection Authority had spent the previous months developing comprehensive monitoring systems to track compliance with the new standards. These systems, which represented a remarkable feat of international technological cooperation, could analyze game behavior in real time across multiple platforms and jurisdictions, identifying violations and triggering enforcement actions within hours of detection. The immediate effects of implementation were visible to players worldwide. Games that had featured complex virtual currency systems were required to display all prices in local currency, revealing costs that many players found shocking. A cosmetic item that might have cost 500 gems was suddenly displayed as $12.99 or Euro 11.50. Creating immediate transparency about real-world costs that had previously been obscured. Lootbox systems underwent the most dramatic changes. Games were required to display exact probability rates for all possible rewards, and many companies discovered that their systems became far less attractive to players when the mathematical reality of random rewards was clearly disclosed. A typical loot box that cost $2.99 might display 97.3% chance of common item worth $0.50, 2.5% chance of rare item worth $3, 0.2% chance of legendary item worth $25, making the poor expected value immediately apparent. The early monitoring data revealed the extent to which the previous system had been dependent on player confusion and mathematical ignorance. Consumer spending on randomized reward systems dropped by an average of 68% across all monitored games in the first month of implementation. However, this reduction was partially offset by increases in direct purchases of specific items, suggesting that players preferred transparent transactions over gambling-like mechanics. One of the most significant early results was the effectiveness of vulnerability protection systems. Companies were required to implement algorithms that could identify potentially problematic spending patterns and intervene with cooling-off periods, spending limits, and referrals to support resources. Early data suggested that these systems were preventing significant financial harm while having minimal impact on healthy player engagement. The cooling-off period requirements also proved immediately effective. Players attempting to make purchases above certain thresholds were required to wait 24 to 72 hours before completing their transactions, depending on the amount involved. Initial compliance reports indicated that approximately 35% of intended large purchases were abandoned during cooling-off periods, suggesting that many previous transactions had been impulsive decisions that players later regretted. The transparency requirements also revealed information that surprised both players and industry observers. Many popular games disclosed that less than 5% of their content was accessible to non-paying players, while others revealed that achieving competitive viability required average expenditures of several $100s per player. This information empowered consumers to make more informed decisions about their gaming investments. The international enforcement mechanisms proved effective in addressing non-compliance. Several companies that attempted to continue operating under previous models found their games removed from major app stores within days of implementation. The coordinated nature of enforcement meant that companies could not simply relocate their operations to avoid oversight, as the IDCPA could track violations across jurisdictions and implement penalties globally. However, the implementation period also revealed some unintended consequences and areas requiring refinement. Small indie developers reported difficulties complying with complex technical requirements, leading to concerns that the regulations might inadvertently favor large companies with greater compliance resources. The IDCPA responded by developing simplified compliance pathways for developers below certain revenue thresholds and providing technical assistance for smaller companies. The cultural impact of the changes extended beyond immediate business considerations. Gaming communities began developing new social norms around spending and monetization. Players who had previously competed based on their willingness to spend money found themselves on more equal footing, leading to renewed focus on skill, creativity, and collaboration rather than financial investment. Educational institutions and consumer advocacy groups reported increased engagement with their digital literacy programs. Parents expressed relief at being able to understand and monitor their children's gaming expenses more effectively, while financial counselors noted improvements in their ability to help clients address problematic gaming spending. The early months of implementation also saw the emergence of new business models that had been impossible under previous systems. Several companies launched ethical premium games that charged higher upfront prices but included all content without additional payments. Others developed innovative subscription models that provided access to comprehensive gaming experiences for predictable monthly fees. The impact on game design was perhaps the most profound long-term consequence of implementation. Developers, freed from the constraints of optimizing for psychological manipulation and revenue extraction, began focusing on creating genuinely engaging gameplay experiences. Early reviews suggested that games designed under the new standards were more satisfying and enjoyable for players, even as they generated different revenue patterns for companies. Market research conducted during the first quarter of 2029 revealed that player satisfaction with gaming experiences had increased significantly compared to previous years. Surveys indicated that players felt more respected by game developers and more confident in their purchasing decisions. Importantly, while individual spending per player had decreased on average, overall player engagement and retention had actually improved, suggesting that ethical business practices were creating more sustainable relationships between players and games. The stock market response to implementation was initially negative, but quickly stabilized as investors recognized that many companies were successfully adapting to the new environment. Companies that had proactively embraced ethical business models during the adaptation period generally outperformed those that had resisted change until the last possible moment. By June 2029, it was clear that the implementation of the Brussels Gaming Accords had succeeded in its primary objectives while creating opportunities for innovation and improvement that had not been fully anticipated. The foundation had been laid for a gaming industry that prioritized player welfare alongside business success. The implementation of the Brussels Gaming Accords created a natural experiment in consumer behavior on a global scale, as millions of players suddenly found themselves interacting with games designed around transparency and fair value exchange, rather than psychological manipulation. The behavioral changes that emerged during the first year of implementation revealed fascinating insights about player motivations, spending patterns, and the relationship between game design and consumer welfare. Research conducted by the Consumer Digital Behavior Institute during 2029 tracked spending and engagement patterns across over 50 million players worldwide. Their findings challenged many assumptions that had guided industry practices for years and provided evidence that ethical business models could create more sustainable and satisfying relationships between players and games. One of the most significant discoveries was that the reduction in overall spending did not translate to reduced player satisfaction or engagement. In fact, player satisfaction scores increased dramatically across all demographic categories, once exploitative mechanics were removed from games. Players reported feeling more respected by developers, more confident in their purchasing decisions, and more likely to recommend games to friends and family members. The demographic shifts in gaming participation were particularly noteworthy. Under previous systems, spending patterns had been heavily skewed toward a small percentage of players, the so-called whales who generated the majority of revenue for most games. The new transparent pricing systems revealed that this concentration of spending had often involved vulnerable individuals making financially harmful decisions under psychological pressure. With the implementation of vulnerability protection systems and cooling-off periods, the player base became more broadly distributed in terms of spending. More players were willing to make moderate, thoughtful purchases when they could clearly understand what they were buying, and when protective mechanisms prevented impulsive or harmful spending decisions. Perhaps most significantly, the elimination of gambling-like mechanics led to substantial changes in how different age groups interacted with games. Teenagers and young adults, who had been disproportionately targeted by loot box systems and social pressure mechanics, began engaging with games in healthier ways. Academic research conducted during this period showed measurable improvements in the mental health outcomes of young people as predatory game design was eliminated. The spending patterns that emerged under the new system proved more sustainable for both players and companies. Instead of the boom-bust cycles that had characterized whale-dependent monetization, games began generating steadier, more predictable revenue streams from players who made conscious, informed purchasing decisions. This stability allowed companies to engage in longer-term planning and invest more resources in game quality rather than monetization optimization. Family gaming dynamics also evolved significantly during this period. Parents reported much greater comfort with their children's gaming activities once spending amounts were transparent and protective mechanisms were in place. Family gaming, which had been discouraged by monetization systems designed to create intergenerational conflict over spending, experienced a renaissance as games became more inclusive and less financially predatory. The elimination of artificial scarcity and time pressure mechanics had profound effects on how players structured their gaming time. Without constant notifications and urgency-inducing features, players began engaging with games during times that fit their schedules rather than responding to psychological manipulation. This led to healthier work-life balance and reduced anxiety among players who had previously felt compelled to maintain constant engagement with their games. International differences in consumer response provided interesting insights into cultural attitudes toward gaming and spending. Players in countries with stronger consumer protection traditions, such as Germany and the Netherlands, adapted quickly to the new systems and expressed high satisfaction with the changes. In contrast, players in markets where predatory monetization had been most prevalent required longer adjustment periods but ultimately showed similar patterns of improved satisfaction and healthier engagement. The social dynamics within gaming communities underwent substantial changes as competitive advantages could no longer be purchased directly. Games that had previously stratified players based on their willingness to spend money evolved toward merit-based progression systems that rewarded skill, creativity, and collaboration. This shift led to more inclusive community cultures and reduced toxicity related to economic competition. Professional gaming and esports experienced a particular renaissance during this period, as competitive integrity was restored to games that had previously been compromised by pay-to-win mechanics. Tournament organizers reported increased viewer engagement and sponsor interest as competitions became more focused on player skill rather than financial investment. The impact on player creativity and community engagement was remarkable. Game modification communities, which had been discouraged by monetization systems that sought to control all aspects of player experience, began flourishing again as companies embraced more open, collaborative relationships with their audiences. User-generated content creation increased substantially, suggesting that players were more willing to invest time and creativity in games that treated them fairly. Educational and therapeutic applications of gaming also expanded during this period. Mental health professionals reported increased comfort with using games as therapeutic tools once exploitive mechanics were removed. Educational institutions began more readily incorporating gaming into curricula, recognizing that games designed around engagement rather than addiction could provide valuable learning experiences. The data also revealed important insights about player motivation and the psychology of gaming engagement. Contrary to industry assumptions that psychological manipulation was necessary to maintain player interest, games designed around intrinsic motivation and fair value exchange showed improved long-term retention rates. Players appeared more likely to return to games that respected their time and money, even if those games were less immediately compelling than their manipulative predecessors. Market segmentation also evolved significantly, as transparent pricing allowed for more diverse and inclusive approaches to game development. Premium games targeted at players willing to pay higher upfront costs for complete experiences found new markets, while subscription-based and free-to-play games that relied on advertising rather than player spending gained popularity among price-sensitive demographics. The consumer behavior changes documented during this period provided compelling evidence that the gaming industry's previous practices had been creating artificial demand through psychological manipulation rather than genuine value creation. The transition to ethical business models revealed latent consumer preferences for fairness, transparency, and respect that had been suppressed by exploitative design patterns. The fundamental changes in gaming monetization required by the Brussels Gaming Accords necessitated comprehensive corporate restructuring across the industry. Companies that had built their entire business models around psychological manipulation and revenue optimization found themselves needing to develop entirely new organizational capabilities, corporate cultures, and strategic approaches to game development and marketing. The transformation was most dramatic at companies that had been heavily dependent on mobile gaming monetization. King Digital Entertainment, creators of Candy Crush Saga, provides an illuminating case study of this restructuring process. The company had employed teams of behavioral psychologists, data scientists, and user experience specialists whose primary focus had been optimizing player spending through psychological manipulation. Under the new regulatory environment, King was forced to eliminate entire departments focused on player lifetime value optimization and conversion funnel management, euphemisms for systems designed to pressure players into spending money. The company redirected these resources toward game design, quality assurance, and customer service, fundamentally altering its operational priorities. The corporate restructuring process revealed the extent to which many gaming companies had become more akin to advertising and data collection enterprises than entertainment companies. Internal audits conducted during 2029 showed that major publishers were often spending more on behavioral analysis and monetization optimization than on actual game development. This misallocation of resources had created a situation where technical innovation and creative development had been subordinated to psychological manipulation techniques. Executive leadership at many companies changed substantially during this period. CEOs and senior managers who had built their careers around exploitative monetization practices often found themselves poorly equipped to lead companies in the new regulatory environment. Board-level changes were common, as shareholders recognized that different skills and perspectives were needed to succeed under ethical business models. The human resources implications of industry restructuring were significant, but ultimately positive for many employees. Game developers, artists, and designers who had grown disillusioned with their roles in creating exploitative systems found renewed purpose in developing genuinely engaging entertainment experiences. Employee satisfaction surveys, conducted industry-wide, showed substantial improvements in job satisfaction and retention. However, the transition also required significant retraining and skill development. Marketing professionals who had specialized in psychological manipulation techniques needed to develop expertise in traditional value-based marketing. Data analysts who had focused on behavioral exploitation needed to learn analytical approaches focused on product improvement and customer satisfaction rather than revenue optimization. The venture capital and investment landscape around gaming also underwent substantial changes. Investors who had previously focused on metrics like revenue per daily active user and conversion rates were forced to develop new frameworks for evaluating gaming companies. This shift led to increased investment in companies focused on sustainable business models and decreased funding for projects built around exploitative monetization. Research and development priorities shifted dramatically across the industry. Companies that had previously invested heavily in psychological manipulation techniques began redirecting resources toward technical innovation, artistic development, and gameplay mechanics. This reallocation of resources led to a flowering of creativity and technical advancement that had been suppressed by the previous focus on monetization optimization. The international nature of the regulatory changes also required companies to develop new approaches to global operations. Rather than seeking jurisdictions with weaker consumer protections, companies needed to design systems that could meet the highest international standards while operating efficiently across multiple markets. This standardization ultimately reduced complexity and operational costs for many companies. Supply chain relationships within the gaming industry also evolved significantly. Third-party service providers that had specialized in monetization optimization, behavioral analysis, and psychological manipulation found their services in dramatically reduced demand. Conversely, companies offering game design consultation, technical infrastructure, and creative services experienced increased business as publishers focused on improving product quality rather than extraction efficiency. The competitive landscape shifted substantially as barriers to entry decreased in many market segments. Small and independent developers who had previously been disadvantaged by their inability to implement sophisticated psychological manipulation systems found themselves on more equal footing with larger competitors. This leveling effect led to increased innovation and diversity in game development. Corporate governance practices also evolved during this period. Many companies implemented ethical review boards to evaluate potential games and features for compliance with both regulatory requirements and broader ethical principles. These boards, often including ethicists, consumer advocates, and mental health professionals, provided oversight that went beyond legal compliance to consider broader social impacts. The accounting and financial reporting practices of gaming companies required substantial modification to reflect the new business environment. Revenue recognition became more straightforward as complex virtual currency systems were eliminated. But companies also needed to develop new metrics for measuring success in an environment where player exploitation was no longer permitted. Mergers and acquisitions activity increased during this period as companies sought to acquire capabilities needed for success under the new regulatory environment. Companies with strong technical infrastructure or creative talent became attractive acquisition targets, while companies that had been primarily valued for their monetization capabilities found their market value significantly reduced. The relationship between gaming companies and their marketing partners also evolved substantially. Advertising agencies and marketing consultants who had specialized in psychological manipulation techniques found reduced demand for their services, while agencies focused on traditional value-based marketing experienced increased business. Corporate social responsibility programs, which had often been superficial marketing exercises during the era of exploitative monetization, became more substantial and meaningful as companies recognized that ethical business practices were now essential for long-term success. Many companies established foundations focused on digital literacy, responsible gaming education, and support for individuals affected by problematic gaming behaviors. The insurance and risk management landscape for gaming companies also changed significantly. Companies that had previously faced reputational and regulatory risks related to exploitative practices found that compliance with ethical business standards reduced their exposure to legal and financial liability. This risk reduction ultimately improved their access to capital and reduced their operational costs. By the end of 2029, the gaming industry had been fundamentally restructured around sustainable, ethical business practices. While this transformation was initially disruptive, companies that successfully navigated the transition found themselves operating in a more stable, predictable, and ultimately profitable environment than the boom-bust cycles that had characterized the previous era of psychological manipulation and player exploitation. As we reach the midpoint of our examination of the Great Microtransaction Correction, it's essential to pause and evaluate the early success and unexpected outcomes of this unprecedented transformation in digital entertainment. The period from January through December 2029 represented the first full year of operation under the Brussels Gaming Accords, providing sufficient data to assess whether the ambitious goals of consumer protection, industry sustainability, and player welfare had been achieved. The quantitative evidence from 2029 painted a remarkably positive picture of the transformation's early success. Consumer spending on gaming had indeed decreased in aggregate terms, falling approximately 23% from peak 2028 levels. However, this reduction was entirely concentrated in the elimination of what economists term negative value transactions. Purchases that provided little or no benefit to consumers while generating substantial profits for companies through psychological manipulation. More significantly, metrics of consumer satisfaction and engagement showed dramatic improvements across all demographic categories. The Gaming Consumer Satisfaction Index, developed by the International Digital Consumer Protection Authority, registered its highest scores since measurements began in 2024. Player retention rates increased substantially, suggesting that games designed around genuine engagement rather than compulsive behavior created more durable relationships between players and entertainment products. The mental health outcomes associated with gaming participation showed perhaps the most significant improvements. Longitudinal studies conducted throughout 2029 by research institutions worldwide documented substantial reductions in gaming-related anxiety, depression, and compulsive spending behaviors. Emergency room visits related to gaming addiction decreased by 47% in countries where the accords had been implemented, while therapy sessions focused on problematic gaming behaviors fell by 61%. Family dynamics around gaming also improved markedly during this period. Parent-child conflicts related to gaming spending virtually disappeared in households where children played games subject to the new regulations. family gaming participation increased substantially as games became more inclusive and less designed to create intergenerational tension over spending decisions. The economic impact on the gaming industry, while initially concerning to investors, proved more benign than predicted. While total industry revenue decreased, profit margins actually improved for most companies as they eliminated the substantial costs associated with behavioral manipulation systems, data collection infrastructure, and legal compliance with complex monetization schemes. Companies that had successfully transitioned to ethical business models reported more stable and predictable revenue streams than they had experienced under previous systems. Employment within the gaming industry remained stable despite predictions of widespread job losses. While some positions focused on psychological manipulation and revenue optimization were eliminated, these reductions were offset by increased hiring in game design, technical development, quality assurance, and customer service. Industry surveys suggested that employee satisfaction had improved substantially as workers found themselves contributing to genuinely valuable entertainment experiences rather than systems designed to exploit consumers. The innovation impact of the regulatory changes exceeded most predictions. Freed from the constraints of optimizing for psychological manipulation, developers began experimenting with new gameplay mechanics, artistic approaches, and technical innovations that had been suppressed by the previous focus on monetization efficiency. The number of patents filed for gaming-related innovations increased by 38% during 2029, suggesting that regulatory constraints had paradoxically unleashed rather than stifled creativity. International cooperation on digital consumer protection proved remarkably effective during this first year of implementation. The International Digital Consumer Protection Authority successfully coordinated enforcement actions across multiple jurisdictions, preventing companies from avoiding oversight by relocating operations. The threat of coordinated global enforcement proved sufficient to ensure widespread compliance without the need for extensive punitive actions. The competitive landscape within gaming became more diverse and innovative during 2029. Independent developers and smaller studios gained market share as the advantages previously enjoyed by companies with sophisticated psychological manipulation capabilities were eliminated. This increased competition led to greater innovation and more diverse gaming experiences for consumers. However, the first year of implementation also revealed areas requiring refinement and adjustment. Small independent developers faced disproportionate compliance costs relative to their revenue, leading to concerns about market concentration favoring larger companies. The IDCPA responded by developing simplified compliance frameworks and providing technical assistance to smaller developers, but ongoing attention to this issue remained necessary. The cultural impact of the changes extended beyond gaming into broader discussions about digital ethics and consumer protection. The success of international cooperation on gaming monetization provided a template for addressing similar issues in social media, online advertising, and other digital platforms that employed psychological manipulation techniques. Educational institutions and digital literacy organizations reported increased effectiveness in their programs, as students could now observe clear examples of both exploitative and ethical design patterns in digital environments. The contrast between pre- and post-correction gaming experiences provided powerful case studies for teaching digital citizenship and consumer awareness. The research community continued to generate valuable insights about the relationship between technology design and human welfare. The natural experiment created by the Brussels Gaming Accords provided unprecedented data about how design changes affected user behavior, mental health, and social relationships. This research was already being applied to other digital platforms and consumer protection contexts. Perhaps most importantly, the first year of implementation demonstrated that comprehensive consumer protection in digital environments was technically feasible and economically viable. The success of the gaming industry transformation contradicted arguments that exploitative business models were necessary for technological innovation or economic sustainability. The foundation established during 2029 created momentum for additional consumer protection initiatives in other digital contexts. Regulatory bodies worldwide began examining social media algorithms, online advertising practices, and digital subscription models with the same analytical frameworks that had proven successful for gaming monetization. As we transition to examining the longer-term impacts and evolution of the Great Microtransaction Correction, the early success of this unprecedented consumer protection initiative provides compelling evidence that technological innovation and business success can coexist with respect for human welfare and ethical design principles. The first phase of the correction had succeeded beyond the most optimistic predictions of its advocates, while proving less disruptive to legitimate business interests than its critics had warned. The years following the initial implementation of the Brussels Gaming Accords witnessed a remarkable renaissance in gaming culture that extended far beyond the immediate regulatory compliance requirements. As the industry stabilized under the new framework, deeper cultural and creative transformations emerged that redefined not just how games were monetized, but how they were conceived, developed, and experienced by players worldwide. The period from 2030 to 2032 became known among gaming historians as the Creative Renaissance, characterized by an explosion of innovative game design that had been suppressed during the era of monetization-focused development. With developers no longer required to optimize every aspect of gameplay for revenue extraction, creative teams found themselves free to experiment with mechanics, narratives, and experiences that prioritized player enjoyment and artistic expression. One of the most significant cultural shifts was the emergence of what researchers termed sustainable gaming communities. These communities, freed from the competitive dynamics created by pay-to-win mechanics and artificial scarcity, developed around skill building, collaborative problem-solving, and creative expression. Long-term studies of gaming communities during this period showed remarkable improvements in social cohesion, mutual support, and inclusive participation across diverse demographic groups. The absence of psychological manipulation techniques also allowed for the development of more authentic relationships between players and game creators. Developers began engaging with their communities as creative collaborators rather than revenue sources, leading to unprecedented levels of player involvement in game development processes. User-generated content creation flourished as players felt genuine ownership and investment in gaming experiences that respected their time and contributions. Educational applications of gaming experienced dramatic expansion during this period. With exploitative mechanics eliminated, educational institutions and training organizations embraced gaming as a legitimate tool for learning and skill development. Medical schools began using sophisticated simulation games for surgical training, while business schools incorporated strategic gaming into their curricula. The trust that had been rebuilt between gaming companies and educational institutions created opportunities for collaboration that had been impossible during the era of predatory monetization. The international gaming community also became more culturally diverse and inclusive during this period. Games that had previously been designed to appeal to high-spending demographics in wealthy countries began incorporating perspectives, stories, and gameplay mechanics from underrepresented communities worldwide. This cultural diversification was facilitated by the elimination of monetization constraints that had previously limited creative experimentation. Family gaming culture underwent particularly significant transformation during the stabilization period. Multi-generational gaming became common as parents felt comfortable participating in gaming activities with their children. Game developers responded to this trend by creating experiences specifically designed for family participation, featuring cooperative gameplay mechanics and age-appropriate content that could engage multiple generations simultaneously. The economic sustainability of ethical gaming models became increasingly apparent during this period. Companies that had successfully transitioned to transparent, fair monetization reported improved long-term financial performance compared to the volatile revenue patterns that had characterized the previous era. Subscription-based gaming services experienced particular growth as players appreciated predictable costs and comprehensive access to gaming libraries. Technological innovation accelerated substantially during the Renaissance period. Game engines became more sophisticated as development resources were redirected from monetization optimization to technical advancement. Virtual reality and augmented reality gaming experienced breakthrough developments as companies focused on creating genuinely immersive experiences rather than psychologically manipulative environments. The professional gaming and esports ecosystem stabilized significantly during this period. Competitive gaming became more merit-based and accessible as pay-to-win mechanics were eliminated from competitive titles. This led to increased legitimacy for esports as both entertainment and sport, with greater recognition from traditional sporting organizations and educational institutions. Academic research on gaming and digital interaction flourished during the Renaissance period. Universities established dedicated gaming studies programs that examined both the creative and social aspects of gaming culture. This research provided valuable insights not only for game development, but for understanding human-computer interaction more broadly. The mental health profession also developed more nuanced and effective approaches to gaming-related concerns during this period. With clearly exploitative practices eliminated, mental health professionals could focus on legitimate issues such as time management and social skill development, rather than dealing with artificial problems created by manipulative design patterns. Gaming therapy, the use of games for therapeutic purposes, gained mainstream acceptance and proved effective for treating various conditions. International cultural exchange through gaming increased dramatically during this period. Games became vehicles for cross-cultural understanding and language learning, as developers created experiences that celebrated diverse cultural perspectives without the constraints of monetization strategies targeting specific demographic groups. The creative workforce in gaming became more diverse and inclusive during the Renaissance period. As the industry shed its reputation for exploitative practices, it attracted talent from backgrounds that had previously been discouraged from participating in gaming development. This diversification of perspectives contributed to the creative flourishing that characterized the period. Art and storytelling in games reached new levels of sophistication during this time. With monetization no longer dictating narrative pacing or character development, writers and artists could create coherent, meaningful experiences that competed with traditional media forms in terms of emotional depth and cultural impact. The preservation and historical study of games also advanced significantly during this period. Academic institutions and cultural organizations began treating games as legitimate cultural artifacts worthy of preservation and analysis. This led to better understanding of gaming history and more thoughtful approaches to future development. Community-driven game development became increasingly common during the Renaissance years. Players who had developed trust and positive relationships with developers during the transition period became active collaborators in creating new gaming experiences. This participatory development model produced innovative games that reflected genuine player interests rather than manipulated behavioral patterns. The stabilization period also saw the emergence of new business models that balanced sustainability with ethical principles. Patronage-based funding, where players supported developers directly through voluntary contributions, became viable for independent creators. Similarly, cooperative gaming ventures where players shared ownership in gaming companies gained popularity. By 2032, the gaming industry had fundamentally transformed not just its monetization practices, but its entire cultural identity. Games had evolved from vehicles for psychological manipulation and revenue extraction into genuine forms of entertainment, art, education, and social connection. This transformation created the foundation for the mature, sustainable gaming ecosystem that we recognize today in 2035. The elimination of exploitative monetization practices catalyzed a remarkable period of technological innovation in the gaming industry, as companies were forced to develop new approaches to creating value for players while maintaining sustainable business models. This technological evolution, spanning roughly from 2030 to 2033, produced innovations that fundamentally improved both the gaming experience and the relationship between players and developers. One of the most significant technological breakthroughs was the development of dynamic fair pricing systems, which used artificial intelligence to provide personalized pricing that reflected genuine value while maintaining transparency and fairness. Unlike the previous generation of AI systems that had been designed to manipulate psychological vulnerabilities, these new systems focused on matching game content and features to individual player preferences and economic circumstances. The dynamic fair pricing systems operated on principles of transparent, algorithmic decision-making, with players able to understand exactly how their personalized prices were calculated. Players in regions with lower economic development might receive lower prices for identical content, while players who demonstrated high engagement with specific types of content might receive recommendations for related experiences at fair market rates. Blockchain technology, which had previously been associated with speculative trading and environmental concerns, found new purpose in creating transparency and trust in gaming transactions. The Gaming Transparency Blockchain, developed through international cooperation between technology companies and regulatory bodies, provided immutable records of all gaming transactions, odds calculations, and player protection interventions. This blockchain system allowed players to verify that games were operating according to their stated rules and that randomized systems were genuinely random rather than manipulated based on player behavior or spending history. Players could independently verify that lootbox odds matched published rates and that no hidden algorithms were adjusting their gaming experience based on their spending patterns. The development of ethical AI systems represented another crucial technological advancement. These AI systems were designed to enhance player enjoyment and engagement through genuinely helpful features rather than psychological manipulation. Ethical AI could provide personalized game recommendations, difficulty adjustments that maintained optimal challenge levels, and social matching systems that connected compatible players for collaborative experiences. Crucially, these AI systems operated under algorithmic transparency principles, meaning that players could understand and control how the systems affected their gaming experiences. Players could adjust or disable AI features according to their preferences, and all AI decisions were logged and available for player review. The elimination of complex virtual currency systems led to innovations in direct value exchange mechanisms. Smart contracts for gaming allowed players to purchase specific, clearly defined experiences or content with automatic fulfillment and satisfaction guarantees. These systems provided legal protections for players while reducing transaction costs and complexity for developers. Subscription gaming services evolved sophisticated personalization and value optimization during this period. Advanced analytics systems could predict player preferences and curate gaming libraries that provided maximum value for individual subscribers. These systems operated transparently, with players able to understand why specific games were recommended and how their subscription fees were allocated across different games and developers. The development of community-driven content economies represented another significant innovation. These systems allowed players to contribute content, modifications, and improvements to games while receiving fair compensation for their contributions. Unlike previous user-generated content systems that had primarily benefited platform owners, these new economies ensured that creative contributors received appropriate recognition and compensation. Virtual reality and augmented reality technologies advanced rapidly during this period, freed from the constraints of designing experiences around monetization rather than immersion. VR developers could focus on creating genuinely compelling virtual environments rather than psychologically manipulative spaces designed to encourage spending. This led to breakthrough applications in education, training, therapy, and entertainment that had been impossible under previous business models. Cross-platform compatibility and data portability became standard features during this period. Players could maintain their progress, achievements, and social connections across different gaming platforms and services without being locked into specific ecosystems for monetization purposes. This interoperability was facilitated by industry-standard protocols developed through the International Digital Consumer Protection Authority. Quality assurance and testing technologies also advanced significantly during this period. Automated systems for detecting exploitative design patterns, psychological manipulation techniques, and compliance violations became sophisticated enough to prevent problematic content from reaching players. These systems operated in real time, providing immediate feedback to developers about potential issues with their games. The development of empathetic game design tools allowed developers to simulate the psychological and emotional impacts of their design decisions on different player populations. These tools incorporated insights from psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience to help developers create experiences that were engaging without being exploitative. Social features in games became more sophisticated and genuinely beneficial during this period. Advanced communication systems could facilitate meaningful social connections while preventing harassment and toxic behavior. Social matching algorithms could connect players based on compatible interests and communication styles rather than spending patterns or monetization potential. Data analytics evolved from tools for optimizing revenue extraction to systems for understanding and improving player experiences. Player welfare analytics could identify signs of problematic gaming behaviors and recommend interventions or support resources. These systems operated with full player consent and transparency, providing individuals with insights into their own gaming patterns and potential areas of concern. The integration of mental health and wellness features became standard in gaming applications during this period. Biometric monitoring systems could detect signs of stress, fatigue, or excessive engagement and recommend appropriate breaks or alternative activities. These systems were designed with player agency and privacy as primary concerns, providing helpful information without creating additional pressure or anxiety. Educational technology integration advanced substantially as gaming platforms became trusted environments for learning and skill development. Sophisticated assessment systems could track learning progress and adapt educational content to individual student needs without compromising privacy or creating competitive pressure among learners. The technological innovations of this period established the foundation for the mature gaming ecosystem of 2035, characterized by transparency, fairness, and genuine value creation for all participants. These technologies demonstrated that sophisticated, engaging gaming experiences were not only compatible with ethical business practices, but were actually enhanced when designed around player welfare rather than exploitation. The transformation of gaming monetization through the Brussels Gaming Accords created ripple effects that extended far beyond the gaming industry itself, influencing broader cultural attitudes toward technology, consumer rights, and the relationship between corporations and individuals in digital environments. The period from 2030 to 2033 witnessed profound social changes that reflected humanity's evolving understanding of ethical technology design and digital citizenship. The success of international cooperation on gaming regulation provided a template for addressing similar issues across other technology sectors. Social media platforms, streaming services, and digital advertising networks found themselves under increased scrutiny as consumers and regulators applied the analytical frameworks developed for gaming to other forms of digital manipulation. The concept of technological consent, the idea that users should genuinely understand and agree to how technology affects their behavior, became a cornerstone of digital rights advocacy worldwide. Educational systems at all levels incorporated lessons from the gaming transformation into their curricula. Digital literacy programs expanded beyond basic computer skills to include critical analysis of psychological manipulation techniques, understanding of behavioral economics, and recognition of exploitative design patterns. Students who had grown up during the transition period became natural advocates for ethical technology design, carrying these values into their adult careers and consumer decisions. The gaming transformation also influenced academic disciplines across universities worldwide. Business schools revised their case studies and ethical frameworks to incorporate lessons from the industry's transition. Psychology programs expanded their focus on technology-human interaction, while computer science curricula increasingly emphasized the social and ethical implications of algorithmic design decisions. Regulatory philosophy evolved significantly during this period, moving away from reactive approaches that addressed problems after they caused harm toward proactive frameworks that prevented exploitative practices from emerging. The Brussels model of international regulatory cooperation became a template for addressing global challenges that transcended national boundaries, from climate change to artificial intelligence governance. Consumer advocacy organizations gained unprecedented influence and sophistication during this period. The success of gaming reform demonstrated that organized consumer action could create meaningful change even against powerful corporate interests. This empowerment led to more effective advocacy across numerous industries, from telecommunications to financial services to healthcare technology. The legal profession developed new specializations and expertise areas related to digital consumer protection. Digital rights law emerged as a distinct practice area, while traditional consumer protection attorneys expanded their knowledge to address technology-specific issues. Law schools introduced new courses on technology ethics and digital consumer rights, preparing the next generation of legal professionals for an increasingly digital world. Cultural attitudes toward addiction and mental health also evolved significantly during this period. The clear connection between exploitative game design and psychological harm helped reduce stigma around technology-related mental health issues. Families and communities became more comfortable discussing and addressing problematic technology use when it was understood as a response to manipulative design rather than personal weakness. The transformation influenced religious and philosophical discussions about technology's role in human flourishing. Religious leaders who had previously struggled to address gaming and technology issues found new frameworks for discussing digital ethics that aligned with traditional moral teachings about exploitation, fairness, and respect for human dignity. International development approaches also incorporated lessons from the gaming transformation. Developing countries that had been targeted by exploitative gaming practices used their experience to develop more sophisticated approaches to technology adoption that prioritized citizen welfare over foreign corporate profits. This led to more thoughtful implementation of digital infrastructure and services in emerging economies. The arts and entertainment industry more broadly was influenced by the gaming transformation. Film, television, and music industries began examining their own use of psychological manipulation techniques in marketing and content delivery. Some companies voluntarily adopted ethical frameworks similar to those implemented in gaming, while others faced increased pressure from consumers and regulators to address exploitative practices. Workplace culture within technology companies evolved significantly during this period. Employees who had witnessed the successful transformation of gaming became advocates for ethical practices within their own organizations. Ethical technology became a career specialization, with professionals focusing specifically on ensuring that technology development served human welfare rather than exploitation. The investment and venture capital community also adapted to the new environment. Ethical technology investment funds emerged to support companies committed to responsible technology development. Traditional investment metrics were supplemented with assessments of social impact and long-term sustainability. Companies with strong ethical practices often found it easier to attract investment and talent than those associated with exploitative business models. Consumer behavior across all technology sectors became more sophisticated and demanding during this period. Individuals who had experienced the difference between exploitative and ethical gaming design became more discerning consumers of all digital services. This increased consumer sophistication created market pressure for ethical practices across numerous industries. Public health approaches to technology use became more nuanced and effective during this period. Rather than advocating for technology avoidance, public health professionals developed frameworks for healthy technology engagement that recognize the benefits of well-designed digital experiences while providing protection against exploitative practices. The transformation also influenced international diplomacy and trade relationships. Countries that had successfully implemented consumer protection for gaming found themselves with valuable expertise and credibility in addressing technology governance challenges. International technology governance became a significant component of diplomatic relationships, with consumer protection standards influencing trade agreements and international cooperation frameworks. Media coverage of technology issues became more sophisticated and critical during this period. Journalists who had covered the gaming transformation developed expertise in analyzing technology business models and identifying potentially exploitative practices. This improved media literacy led to better public understanding of technology issues and more effective accountability for corporate behavior. The gaming transformation ultimately demonstrated that technology could serve human flourishing when designed with appropriate ethical constraints and regulatory oversight. This lesson influenced approaches to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and biotechnology, ensuring that society's experience with gaming exploitation informed more thoughtful development of future innovations. By 2033, the cultural impact of the gaming transformation had established new baseline expectations for how technology companies should relate to their users and how governments should protect citizens in digital environments. These changed expectations created the foundation for the mature ethical technology ecosystem that characterizes our world in 2035. The economic transformation of the gaming industry following the Brussels Gaming Accords provided economists with a unique natural experiment in how regulatory intervention could simultaneously improve consumer welfare and market efficiency. The data collected from 2029 through 2034 challenged conventional assumptions about the relationship between consumer protection and business profitability, while demonstrating the economic benefits of eliminating exploitative business practices. Traditional economic theory had suggested that restrictions on business practices would necessarily reduce efficiency and profitability. However, the gaming industry's experience revealed that exploitative monetization had actually created significant market inefficiencies that regulatory intervention corrected rather than introduced. The elimination of psychological manipulation allowed for more accurate price discovery and better matching between consumer preferences and product offerings. Consumer surplus, the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay, increased dramatically following the implementation of the Accords. Before the reforms, many gaming transactions had involved consumers paying more than they intended due to psychological manipulation, creating negative consumer surplus in many cases. The transparency requirements and cooling-off periods allowed consumers to make more informed decisions that better reflected their actual preferences and budget constraints. Producer surplus also stabilized at higher levels over the medium term, despite initial concerns about revenue reductions. Companies discovered that transparent, fair pricing led to more predictable revenue streams and reduced the substantial costs associated with developing and maintaining complex psychological manipulation systems. Customer acquisition costs decreased as companies could rely on genuine value propositions rather than expensive marketing campaigns designed to overcome consumer skepticism. The total economic welfare generated by the gaming industry increased significantly following the reforms. Deadweight losses, inefficiencies that benefit neither consumers nor producers, were substantially reduced as transactions became more voluntary and informed. The elimination of coercive design patterns meant that economic activity in gaming more accurately reflected genuine value creation rather than wealth transfer from vulnerable consumers to corporations. Market concentration, which had been increasing during the era of exploitative monetization, stabilized and began declining after the reforms. The technical expertise required to implement psychological manipulation systems had created barriers to entry that favored large companies with substantial data science and behavioral psychology capabilities. The elimination of these practices leveled the competitive playing field, allowing smaller developers to compete more effectively based on creativity and game quality. Innovation rates, measured through patent applications and new product launches, increased substantially following the reforms. The redirection of resources from monetization optimization to actual game development led to breakthrough innovations in gameplay mechanics, technical infrastructure, and user experience design. This innovation was more broadly beneficial than previous developments focused on revenue extraction. Employment within the gaming industry remained stable despite initial predictions of job losses. While some positions focused on behavioral manipulation were eliminated, these were offset by increased hiring in game design, quality assurance, customer service, and technical development. More importantly, job satisfaction surveys indicated substantial improvements in employee welfare as workers found themselves contributing to genuinely valuable products. The international competitiveness of the gaming industry actually improved following the reforms, contrary to predictions that regulation would handicap companies in global markets. Games designed under ethical frameworks proved more appealing to international audiences and faced fewer regulatory challenges when entering new markets. Companies that had successfully adapted to the Brussels Gaming Accords found advantages when expanding into regions with strong consumer protection traditions. Consumer spending patterns stabilized at more sustainable levels following the reforms. While total spending decreased initially, the reduction was concentrated in transactions that had provided little or no value to consumers. Spending on games and content that provided genuine entertainment value remained stable or increased, suggesting that demand for quality gaming experiences was robust when not artificially inflated through manipulation. The macroeconomic impact of the gaming transformation was broadly positive. Reduced spending on exploitative gaming transactions increased disposable income available for other consumption and savings. Families reported improved financial stability as gaming-related debt and excessive spending decreased substantially. This freed up household resources for education, healthcare, and other investments in long-term welfare. Credit markets also benefited from the gaming transformation. Financial institutions reported reduced defaults and delinquencies related to excessive gaming spending. Credit counselors noted fewer clients seeking help with gaming-related debt, allowing these professionals to focus on other forms of financial distress. The improved financial stability of households contributed to broader economic stability. Insurance markets developed new products and approaches during this period. Companies could offer lower-cost coverage for digital fraud and excessive spending, as the risk of exploitation through gaming decreased. Health insurance providers noted reduced claims related to gaming addiction and associated mental health issues, leading to lower premiums for comprehensive coverage. The venture capital and investment landscape evolved to better evaluate sustainable business models. Investors developed new metrics for assessing companies that focused on long-term value creation rather than short-term revenue optimization through exploitation. This led to more patient capital and longer investment horizons that supported genuine innovation. International trade in gaming products became more straightforward and efficient following the harmonization of consumer protection standards. Companies no longer needed to develop different versions of games for different regulatory environments, reducing complexity and development costs. This standardization facilitated international expansion and cooperation within the industry. Economic research conducted during this period provided valuable insights applicable to other industries and regulatory contexts. The gaming transformation demonstrated that market failures related to information asymmetries, psychological manipulation, and externalized social costs could be effectively addressed through well-designed regulation without sacrificing economic efficiency. Tax policy also evolved during this period to better reflect the social costs and benefits of different business models. Several jurisdictions implemented tax incentives for companies that adopted ethical business practices while imposing additional taxes on companies that continued to employ exploitative techniques in other sectors. The economic success of the gaming transformation influenced regulatory approaches across numerous other industries. Financial services, telecommunications, and digital advertising sectors faced increased scrutiny and pressure to adopt similar consumer protection frameworks. The economic benefits demonstrated in gaming provided compelling evidence for the broader applicability of ethical business regulation. By 2034, economic analysis clearly demonstrated that the gaming industry transformation had created a more efficient, innovative, and welfare-enhancing market structure. This evidence became crucial in supporting similar regulatory initiatives in other technology sectors and establishing the economic foundations for the ethical technology ecosystem that characterizes our current economy in 2035. The technological innovations developed in response to the Brussels Gaming Accords created spillover effects that transformed numerous other industries and established new standards for ethical technology design across the digital economy. The solutions created for gaming consumer protection proved applicable to a wide range of digital platforms and services, accelerating the development of ethical technology practices throughout the 2030s. The dynamic fair pricing systems originally developed for gaming found immediate application in digital content distribution, software licensing, and online services. Streaming platforms adopted these technologies to provide personalized pricing that reflected regional economic conditions while maintaining transparency about algorithmic pricing decisions. Educational technology companies used similar systems to make learning resources more accessible across different economic circumstances. Algorithmic transparency tools, initially created to help gaming consumers understand how AI systems affect their experiences, became standard features across social media platforms, search engines, and recommendation systems. Users gained unprecedented visibility into how algorithms shaped their digital experiences, leading to more informed decisions about technology use and greater trust in digital platforms. The blockchain-based transaction verification systems developed for gaming transparency were adapted for use in digital advertising, financial services, and supply chain management. These systems provided immutable records of transactions and algorithmic decisions, enabling better accountability and reducing fraud across numerous industries. Ethical AI frameworks pioneered in gaming became templates for responsible artificial intelligence development across sectors. Healthcare AI systems adopted similar principles of transparency, user control, and bias prevention. Financial technology companies implemented ethical AI guidelines that prioritize customer welfare over profit optimization, leading to more trustworthy and beneficial automated services. The vulnerability protection systems created for gaming proved valuable in preventing exploitation in social media, online shopping, and digital financial services. Banks and credit card companies adapted gaming vulnerability detection algorithms to identify and prevent problematic spending patterns across all types of transactions. Social media platforms used similar techniques to identify users at risk of harmful engagement patterns. Cross-platform compatibility and data portability standards developed for gaming influenced broader discussions about technology platform interoperability. Users gained the ability to move their data and social connections between different service providers, reducing platform lock-in effects and increasing competition among technology companies. Quality assurance tools for detecting exploitative design patterns found applications in user interface design across numerous industries. Web design, mobile app development, and software engineering incorporated automated tools for identifying and eliminating dark patterns that might manipulate user behavior. The community-driven content economies developed for gaming influenced the evolution of social media platforms, content sharing services, and collaborative software. These systems provided fairer compensation for user-generated content and gave communities more control over their digital environments. Biometric monitoring and wellness integration technologies from gaming were adapted for workplace productivity tools, educational software, and health applications. These systems could detect signs of stress, fatigue, or excessive engagement across different digital activities, promoting healthier technology use patterns. The International Digital Consumer Protection Authority's governance model influenced the development of regulatory frameworks for artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and financial technology. The successful international cooperation demonstrated in gaming provided a template for addressing global technology governance challenges. Mental health and digital wellness features pioneered in gaming became standard components of digital devices and applications. Smartphones, tablets, and computers incorporated similar monitoring and intervention systems to promote healthy technology use across all applications rather than just games. Educational technology platforms adopted the personalization and engagement techniques developed for ethical gaming. These systems could adapt to individual learning styles and paces without employing manipulative techniques, making education more effective and accessible. Healthcare technology benefited substantially from gaming innovations. Patient engagement platforms used gamification techniques that were genuinely motivating rather than exploitative. Medical training simulations incorporated the immersive technologies developed for ethical virtual reality gaming. Financial technology services adopted transparency and consumer protection standards originally developed for gaming. Investment platforms, lending services, and payment systems implemented similar cooling-off periods, clear pricing disclosure, and vulnerability protection features. Digital marketing and advertising evolved to incorporate ethical frameworks from gaming. Advertising platforms developed systems that could provide personalized content without exploiting psychological vulnerabilities or manipulating consumer behavior in harmful ways. E-commerce platforms implemented fair pricing algorithms and transaction transparency systems based on gaming innovations. Online retailers could provide personalized pricing and recommendations while maintaining consumer trust through clear algorithmic explanations and user control options. The legal technology sector developed new tools for contract analysis and compliance monitoring based on gaming regulatory technologies. These systems could automatically identify potentially exploitative terms in digital service agreements and provide simplified explanations to consumers. Workplace productivity and collaboration tools incorporated the community building and social interaction technologies developed for gaming. These systems could facilitate genuine team collaboration and relationship building without creating addictive engagement patterns that might harm employee well-being. Smart City and Internet of Things applications adopted privacy and transparency standards originally developed for gaming consumer protection. Citizens gained better understanding and control over how smart city systems collected and used their data. The venture capital and startup ecosystem evolved to prioritize ethical technology development based on lessons learned from gaming industry transformation. Investment criteria increasingly emphasized long-term sustainability and social benefit rather than short-term user engagement optimization. Academic research institutions developed new methodologies for evaluating technology's social impact based on the comprehensive studies conducted during the gaming transformation. These research approaches provided better evidence for policy decisions across numerous technology sectors. International technology trade and cooperation agreements incorporated consumer protection standards based on the Brussels Gaming Accords model. Countries could negotiate technology partnerships that prioritized citizen welfare while promoting innovation and economic development. By 2034, the technological spillover effects from gaming reform had created a foundation for ethical technology development across the entire digital economy. The solutions developed for gaming consumer protection had proven broadly applicable and economically viable, establishing new baseline expectations for how technology companies should design and operate their systems. The gaming industry's transformation had thus served as a catalyst for broader digital economy reform, demonstrating that ethical technology practices were not only possible but advantageous for both businesses and consumers across numerous sectors. The necessity of replacing exploitative monetization with sustainable, ethical alternatives sparked remarkable creativity in business model development across the gaming industry. The period from 2029 to 2034 produced numerous innovative approaches that balanced profitability with consumer welfare, creating templates that would influence business model design across the technology sector. Nexus Entertainment's transformation provides an exemplary case study of comprehensive business model redesign. Previously dependent on loot box mechanics that generated over 70% of their revenue, the company faced potential extinction when these practices were banned. However, their response demonstrated how regulatory constraints could catalyze innovation rather than stifle it. Nexus developed the Player Journey Partnership model, which treated players as collaborators in content creation rather than sources of revenue extraction. Players could purchase development shares in upcoming games, providing funding for development while gaining voting rights on design decisions and revenue sharing in successful titles. This model created genuine alignment between player interests and company success while providing sustainable funding for game development. The company also pioneered dynamic content pricing that adjusted the cost of additional content based on player engagement and demonstrated value rather than psychological manipulation. Players who actively participated in community features and provided constructive feedback received discounts on new content, while those who showed signs of problematic spending were offered alternative engagement options that didn't involve financial transactions. Indie developer Sustainable Studios created the community stewardship model that eliminated traditional monetization entirely in favor of voluntary player support. Their games were freely available to all players, but community members could contribute to development costs through transparent donation systems that clearly showed how funds were used. This model proved surprisingly successful, generating sufficient revenue to support full-time development while creating intensely loyal player communities. Mobile game publisher Phoenix Games developed the ethical free-to-play framework that provided complete game experiences without payment while offering cosmetic customization and convenience features for players who chose to spend money. Crucially, their system ensured that non-paying players never received inferior experiences and that all monetized features provided clear, proportional value. Subscription service GameSphere created the all-access gaming library model that provided unlimited access to hundreds of games for a fixed monthly fee. Unlike previous subscription services that had often featured inferior content or hidden additional charges, GameSphere ensured that all content was available to subscribers without additional fees, and that new releases were included in the subscription immediately upon launch. Educational gaming company Learning Dynamics developed the Social Impact Partnership model, where educational institutions, families, and students could contribute to game development based on their ability to pay. Schools in wealthy districts might pay premium rates for access to educational games, subsidizing free access for schools in underserved communities. This model created sustainable revenue while advancing educational equity. Virtual reality developer Immersive Worlds pioneered the experience economy model that charged players based on the time and quality of their virtual reality experiences, rather than for virtual items or progression advantages. Players paid for access to carefully crafted, time-limited virtual experiences, similar to theme park attractions, that provided genuine entertainment value proportional to their cost. Cooperative gaming company Collective Play developed the player ownership model, where active community members could become stakeholders in the games they played most frequently. Long-term players earned ownership shares based on their contributions to game communities, ensuring that those who created value for games received proportional benefits from their success. Family gaming specialist Generations Interactive created the household gaming plans that provided comprehensive gaming access for entire families at predictable monthly costs. These plans included parental controls, educational content, and multiplayer features designed to bring families together rather than create conflicts over spending or screen time. Competitive gaming platform Esports Unity developed the skill-based economy model, where players could earn revenue through demonstrated gaming skill rather than spending money. Top players received revenue sharing from spectator viewership and sponsor partnerships, creating legitimate pathways for gaming careers while maintaining competitive integrity. Cultural preservation organization Heritage Games created the Cultural Gaming Archive model that partnered with museums, libraries, and cultural institutions to create games that preserved and shared cultural knowledge. These games were funded through a combination of institutional partnerships, educational grants, and public support, demonstrating how gaming could serve social and cultural purposes beyond entertainment. Accessibility-focused developer Universal Gaming pioneered the inclusive access model that ensured all games were fully accessible to players with disabilities while generating revenue through premium customization and comfort features that appealed to all players. This model proved that accessibility could be profitable while serving underrepresented communities. International cooperation company Global Games created the cross-cultural exchange model that facilitated cultural sharing through gaming experiences. Players from different countries could access games showcasing other cultures, with revenue shared between developers in different regions to promote international understanding and economic cooperation. Therapeutic gaming company Wellness Interactive developed the Health Partnership model that worked with healthcare providers to create games that supported mental health and physical therapy goals. These games were often covered by health insurance as therapeutic tools, creating sustainable revenue streams while providing genuine health benefits. Retirement community developer Silver Gaming created specialized gaming experiences for older adults, demonstrating that ethical monetization could serve demographics that had been ignored by previous industry business models. Their community engagement model generated revenue through social features and educational content that appealed specifically to older players. These innovative business models shared several common characteristics that distinguished them from exploitative predecessors. They provided clear, proportional value for all financial transactions. They treated players as partners or beneficiaries rather than targets for exploitation. They aligned company incentives with player welfare and community health. They demonstrated transparency in pricing and business operations. Most importantly, these models proved economically viable while serving diverse player communities and social purposes. Companies that adopted ethical business models often found themselves with more stable, predictable revenue streams and stronger relationships with their player communities than had been possible under exploitative systems. The success of these innovative approaches provided templates that influenced business model development across numerous other industries, demonstrating that creative approaches to value creation could serve both commercial and social purposes simultaneously. The elimination of predatory gaming monetization provided researchers with an unprecedented opportunity to study the mental health and social impacts of different technology design approaches. Longitudinal studies conducted from 2029 through 2034 generated compelling evidence about the relationship between ethical technology design and human welfare, informing not only gaming development, but broader approaches to digital mental health. The most comprehensive research initiative was the Global Digital Wellness Study, coordinated by the World Health Organization in partnership with universities worldwide. This study tracked over 100,000 participants across different age groups, cultural backgrounds, and gaming engagement levels, documenting changes in mental health outcomes before, during, and after the implementation of ethical gaming standards. The results were remarkable in their consistency across different populations and regions. Participants who had previously exhibited signs of gaming-related anxiety, depression, and compulsive behavior showed significant improvements within 6 months of the regulatory changes taking effect. More surprisingly, many participants who had not previously recognized problematic patterns in their gaming behavior reported improvements in overall well-being and life satisfaction. Dr. Sarah Chen's research team at Stanford University conducted particularly detailed studies of adolescent mental health outcomes. Their findings challenged previous assumptions about the relationship between gaming and psychological development. When exploitative design elements were removed, gaming participation was associated with positive outcomes, including improved problem-solving skills, enhanced social connections, and increased creative expression. The study revealed that many mental health issues previously attributed to gaming itself were actually responses to manipulative design patterns rather than inherent features of digital entertainment. Adolescents who continued gaming under ethical frameworks showed lower rates of anxiety and depression compared to those who stopped gaming entirely, suggesting that the medium itself could be beneficial when designed responsibly. Family relationship research conducted by the Institute for Digital Family Studies documented dramatic improvements in family dynamics following the gaming industry transformation. Parent-child conflicts related to gaming decreased by over 80% in families where children played games subject to the new regulations. Family gaming participation increased substantially, with many families reporting that shared gaming experiences had become positive bonding activities. The research also revealed important insights about gaming's potential therapeutic applications. Mental health professionals who had previously been hesitant to incorporate gaming into treatment plans began reporting successful outcomes using carefully designed therapeutic games. These applications proved particularly effective for treating anxiety disorders, depression, and social skill development challenges. Addiction research provided some of the most compelling evidence for the transformation's success. The International Center for Gaming Disorder Studies reported a 73% reduction in new cases of diagnosed gaming addiction following the implementation of ethical design standards. Existing treatment programs noted faster recovery times and lower relapse rates among patients whose gaming environments had been modified to eliminate exploitative elements. Neurological research conducted using brain imaging technology revealed fascinating insights about how different design patterns affected brain function. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team at the University of Barcelona documented that exploitative gaming mechanics activated brain regions associated with addiction and compulsive behavior, while ethically designed games activated areas related to learning, creativity, and social connection. These neurological findings provided biological evidence for what behavioral researchers had observed, that the human brain responded differently to games designed around psychological manipulation versus those focused on genuine engagement and entertainment. The research suggested that ethical game design could actually support healthy brain development and function. Economic psychology research examined how changes in gaming monetization affected broader financial decision-making and behavior. Families that had been subject to exploitative gaming practices showed improved financial planning and reduced impulsive spending across all categories following the regulatory changes. This suggested that exposure to manipulative design patterns had negative spillover effects on general financial judgment. Social isolation and community connection research yielded particularly interesting results. Many participants reported feeling more connected to their gaming communities and more satisfied with their social relationships after exploitative elements were removed from games. The research suggested that competitive dynamics based on spending rather than skill had been undermining the social benefits that gaming could provide. Educational research documented significant improvements in academic performance among students whose gaming experiences had been transformed by ethical design standards. Students reported better sleep quality, improved time management, and enhanced focus on academic tasks. Teachers noted reduced classroom conflicts related to gaming discussions and increased student engagement with educational gaming applications. Workplace productivity research revealed that employees who gamed ethically designed games during leisure time showed improved problem-solving abilities, enhanced teamwork skills, and better stress management compared to those who had been exposed to exploitative gaming designs. This evidence supported arguments that ethical gaming could contribute to professional development and workplace well-being. Longitudinal aging research provided valuable insights about gaming's impact on cognitive health across the lifespan. Older adults who participated in appropriately designed gaming experiences showed slower cognitive decline and maintained better social connections compared to those who avoided gaming entirely or had negative experiences with exploitative designs. Cultural research examined how different societies and communities responded to the transformation of gaming culture. Communities that had strong collective values and social support systems adapted more quickly to ethical gaming practices, while communities that had been more affected by individualistic and consumption-focused cultural influences required longer adjustment periods. Gender-specific research revealed that women and girls, who had often been excluded from gaming communities due to toxic behaviors encouraged by competitive spending dynamics, showed increased participation and satisfaction with gaming experiences after exploitative elements were eliminated. This suggested that ethical design could make gaming more inclusive across diverse demographic groups. International comparative research documented how different cultural contexts influenced the effectiveness of various consumer protection measures. Societies with stronger collective decision-making traditions found community-based protection measures most effective, while cultures emphasizing individual autonomy preferred personal control and transparency features. The research also provided important insights for future technology development. Studies of emerging technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence incorporated lessons learned from gaming transformation to develop ethical design principles from the outset, rather than requiring later regulatory intervention. By 2034, the accumulated research evidence clearly demonstrated that ethical technology design was not only compatible with positive mental health and social outcomes, but was actually essential for technology to serve human flourishing. This research foundation informed policy decisions, business practices, and individual choices about technology use across numerous sectors beyond gaming. The success of the Brussels Gaming Accords catalyzed a broader evolution in international technology governance that extended far beyond gaming regulation. The period from 2030 to 2034 witnessed the development of sophisticated international frameworks for digital consumer protection that influenced everything from artificial intelligence governance to social media regulation to financial technology oversight. The International Digital Consumer Protection Authority evolved from its initial focus on gaming into a comprehensive digital rights organization with expanded authority over multiple technology sectors. This evolution reflected growing recognition that the principles successfully applied to gaming, transparency, consumer protection, vulnerability prevention, and fair value exchange, were equally relevant to other digital platforms and services. The IDCPA's governance model became a template for international technology cooperation more broadly. Unlike traditional international organizations that relied primarily on voluntary compliance and diplomatic pressure, the IDCPA demonstrated that meaningful enforcement mechanisms were essential for effective technology governance. The organization's ability to coordinate enforcement actions across multiple jurisdictions and impose real consequences for non-compliance provided a model for addressing other global technology challenges. The European Union's Digital Services Act, significantly expanded in 2031, incorporated lessons learned from gaming regulation to address algorithmic transparency and consumer protection across all digital platforms. The Act required that recommendation algorithms, pricing systems, and user engagement mechanisms meet transparency and fairness standards, similar to those developed for gaming applications. The United States developed federal legislation building on successful state-level initiatives that had begun with gaming regulation. The Digital Consumer Protection Act of 2032 established national standards for algorithmic transparency, psychological manipulation prevention, and vulnerability protection across all digital services accessible to American consumers. China's approach to digital consumer protection evolved significantly during this period, moving from primarily content-focused regulation toward comprehensive consumer welfare frameworks. The Chinese government's recognition that exploitative digital business models could harm social stability and economic development led to robust domestic regulations that often exceeded international standards. The United Kingdom's post-Brexit regulatory approach became a model for how individual nations could maintain high consumer protection standards while remaining competitive in global technology markets. The UK's Digital Consumer Rights Act of 2033 established some of the world's strongest protections against psychological manipulation in digital services, while providing clear pathways for ethical technology innovation. Developing nations found that the international cooperation frameworks developed for gaming provided opportunities to leapfrog directly to ethical technology standards, rather than repeating the exploitative phases that early adopting countries had experienced. The Global South Digital Rights Alliance, formed in 2032, coordinated policy development across emerging economies to ensure that technology adoption served development goals rather than enabling extraction by foreign corporations. International trade agreements increasingly incorporated digital consumer protection standards, reflecting recognition that these issues affected economic sovereignty and citizen welfare. The Trans-Pacific Digital Rights Agreement, negotiated in 2033, established minimum consumer protection standards for all digital services traded among member countries. The World Trade Organization developed new frameworks for addressing digital services trade that balanced free market principles with consumer protection requirements. These frameworks recognized that truly free markets required protection against psychological manipulation and information asymmetries that could distort consumer choice. Financial technology regulation evolved rapidly during this period, incorporating lessons from gaming about vulnerability protection and transparency requirements. International banking regulators developed coordinated standards for digital payment systems, cryptocurrency platforms, and automated financial services that prevented the exploitation techniques that had characterized gaming monetization. Artificial intelligence governance benefited substantially from the regulatory frameworks developed for gaming. International AI governance initiatives incorporated principles of algorithmic transparency, human agency, and bias prevention that had proven effective in gaming contexts. The Global AI Ethics Accord of 2034 drew heavily on gaming regulation experiences in developing enforceable standards for AI development and deployment. Social media regulation advanced significantly during this period, as platforms found themselves subject to increasing pressure to adopt consumer protection measures similar to those implemented in gaming. The International Social Media Governance Initiative, launched in 2033, developed standards for algorithmic recommendations, engagement optimization, and user vulnerability protection that were directly inspired by gaming regulation successes. Educational technology governance emerged as a distinct policy area during this period, with special protections for children and students. The Global Educational Technology Standards, developed through UNESCO in collaboration with the IDCPA, ensured that learning platforms prioritized educational outcomes over engagement optimization. Healthcare technology regulation incorporated gaming-derived principles of transparency and patient protection. Medical device software, health monitoring applications, and telemedicine platforms became subject to consumer protection standards that prevented exploitation of patient vulnerability and health anxiety. Regional governance initiatives also flourished during this period. The African Union's Digital Rights Framework, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Technology Consumer Protection Agreement, and the Organization of American States Digital Democracy Initiative all drew on gaming regulation experiences to develop regionally appropriate consumer protection standards. The role of civil society organizations in technology governance expanded significantly during this period. Consumer advocacy groups, digital rights organizations, and public interest technology groups gained formal recognition and consultation roles in policy development processes. The success of gaming advocacy provided templates for effective civic engagement on technology issues. Academic research institutions developed new interdisciplinary programs focused on technology governance, drawing on experiences from gaming regulation to prepare the next generation of policymakers, researchers, and advocates. These programs integrated technical knowledge with insights from psychology, economics, law, and public policy. International funding mechanisms emerged to support ethical technology development and consumer protection enforcement. The Global Digital Rights Fund, established through international cooperation in 2033, provided resources for developing countries to implement consumer protection standards and for civil society organizations to monitor compliance and advocate for improvements. Corporate governance practices evolved significantly during this period, as companies recognized that proactive adoption of ethical technology practices was becoming essential for maintaining market access and investor confidence. Many companies established chief ethics officers and ethics review boards specifically focused on technology development and deployment. The legal profession developed new specializations and practice areas focused on international technology law and digital consumer protection. Law schools established programs in comparative digital rights law, while practicing attorneys developed expertise in cross-border technology governance and enforcement. By 2034, the international policy framework for digital consumer protection had matured into a sophisticated system that balanced innovation incentives with human welfare protection. The success of gaming regulation had provided proof of concept for comprehensive technology governance that served citizen interests while maintaining space for beneficial innovation. The foundation established during this period created the institutional and legal framework for addressing emerging technology challenges, ensuring that future innovations would be evaluated and governed according to principles that prioritized human flourishing alongside technological advancement. As we approach the conclusion of our examination of the Great Microtransaction Correction, it's important to acknowledge that while the transformation achieved remarkable success in reforming gaming monetization, it also revealed ongoing challenges and areas requiring continued attention. The period from 2033 to 2035 has been characterized by efforts to address these remaining issues while preserving the gains achieved through international cooperation and regulatory innovation. One persistent challenge has been ensuring that consumer protection standards remain relevant as technology continues to evolve. The rapid advancement of virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence technologies has created new opportunities for both beneficial innovation and potential exploitation. Regulatory frameworks that were designed for traditional gaming applications have required continuous adaptation to address emerging technologies and business models. The development of metaverse platforms has presented particularly complex challenges for consumer protection enforcement. These immersive virtual environments blur traditional boundaries between gaming, social media, commerce, and education, requiring regulatory approaches that can address multiple aspects of user experience simultaneously. The IDCPA has had to develop new expertise and enforcement capabilities to effectively monitor these complex virtual environments. Artificial intelligence integration in gaming and digital services has created both opportunities and risks for consumer welfare. AI systems that can provide personalized, beneficial experiences for users also have the potential to enable sophisticated new forms of psychological manipulation, if not properly constrained. Ongoing research and policy development has been necessary to ensure that AI enhances rather than undermines consumer protection objectives. The enforcement of international standards across different cultural and legal contexts has remained an ongoing challenge. While the Brussels Gaming Accords established broad principles for consumer protection, implementing these principles in countries with different legal traditions, economic conditions, and cultural values has required continuous diplomatic engagement and policy adaptation. Small independent developers have continued to face disproportionate compliance costs relative to their resources, creating ongoing concerns about market concentration and barriers to entry. While the IDCPA has developed simplified compliance frameworks and technical assistance programs, ensuring that consumer protection standards don't inadvertently favor large corporations over innovative smaller companies remains an active area of policy development. The measurement and evaluation of consumer welfare outcomes has proven more complex than initially anticipated. While clear metrics exist for obvious problems like gambling addiction and excessive spending, assessing more subtle aspects of psychological well-being and social impact requires sophisticated research methodologies and long-term data collection that continues to evolve. International coordination becomes more challenging as more countries develop their own consumer protection standards and enforcement capabilities. While harmonization was relatively straightforward when few countries had comprehensive frameworks, managing coordination among dozens of jurisdictions with different priorities and approaches requires increasingly sophisticated diplomatic and technical cooperation. The technology industry's rapid evolution means that new business models and potential exploitation techniques emerge continuously. Regulatory frameworks that focus on specific practices rather than underlying principles risk becoming obsolete quickly, requiring ongoing attention to maintaining the flexibility and adaptability of consumer protection standards. Educational institutions and digital literacy programs face the ongoing challenge of keeping pace with rapidly evolving technology landscapes. Preparing consumers to recognize and respond appropriately to new forms of digital manipulation requires educational approaches that can adapt quickly to emerging threats and opportunities. The global nature of digital services continues to create challenges for enforcement and accountability. Companies can still attempt to avoid oversight by structuring their operations across multiple jurisdictions, requiring continued vigilance and cooperation among regulatory bodies to prevent regulatory arbitrage. Privacy and data protection issues have become increasingly important as consumer protection measures require sophisticated monitoring and analysis of user behavior. Balancing effective consumer protection with individual privacy rights requires ongoing attention and policy refinement. The integration of gaming and gamification techniques into non-entertainment applications, education, fitness, workplace productivity, healthcare, has created new contexts where the lessons learned from gaming regulation need to be adapted and applied. Ensuring that beneficial gamification doesn't reintroduce exploitative elements requires ongoing oversight and policy development. Economic inequality and digital divides continue to affect access to ethical digital services. While consumer protection standards have improved experiences for users who can access well-regulated platforms, ensuring that these benefits extend to underserved communities and developing regions remains an ongoing challenge. The measurement of long-term social and cultural impacts of the gaming transformation continues to require sophisticated research and analysis. Understanding how changes in gaming culture affect broader social relationships, educational outcomes, and cultural values requires longitudinal studies that are still ongoing. Despite these ongoing challenges, the legacy of the Great Microtransaction Correction has been profoundly positive. The transformation demonstrated that international cooperation could effectively address global technology governance challenges. It proved that consumer protection and business innovation could coexist and mutually reinforce each other. It established precedents for proactive rather than reactive approaches to technology governance. Most importantly, the gaming transformation changed expectations about the relationship between technology companies and their users. Consumers now expect transparency, fairness, and respect for their welfare from digital services. Companies recognize that ethical business practices are not only morally imperative, but also economically advantageous in the long term. The institutional frameworks developed for gaming consumer protection have provided templates for addressing other technology governance challenges. The principles of transparency, vulnerability protection, fair value exchange, and international cooperation continue to guide policy development across numerous technology sectors. The research methodologies and analytical frameworks developed during the gaming transformation continue to inform understanding of technology's impact on human welfare. The interdisciplinary collaboration between technologists, psychologists, economists, and policymakers that characterize the gaming reform effort has become a standard approach for addressing complex technology governance challenges. The advocacy and civic engagement strategies that proved effective in gaming reform continue to provide models for citizen participation in technology governance. Consumer advocacy organizations, digital rights groups, and public interest technology initiatives continue to play essential roles in monitoring and improving technology governance. As we look toward the future, the legacy of the Great Microtransaction Correction provides both inspiration and practical guidance for addressing emerging technology challenges. The transformation demonstrated that seemingly intractable problems could be solved through sustained effort, international cooperation, and commitment to human welfare over short-term economic interests. As we conclude our comprehensive examination of the Great Microtransaction Correction, we find ourselves at a unique vantage point from which to assess not only what this transformation accomplished, but what it revealed about the relationship between technology, commerce, and human welfare in the digital age. The decade-long process that began with academic research and consumer advocacy in the early 2020s and culminated in the mature, ethical gaming ecosystem of 2035 offers profound lessons that extend far beyond the gaming industry itself. The transformation succeeded because it addressed fundamental questions about how technology should serve human flourishing rather than exploit human vulnerabilities. The gaming industry's journey from predatory monetization to ethical business practices demonstrated that the tension between profitability and consumer welfare was often false. That sustainable business success frequently aligned with consumer protection and social responsibility when companies were prevented from externalizing the costs of psychological manipulation onto vulnerable individuals and communities. The international cooperation that characterized the Brussels Gaming Accords and their implementation proved that global technology governance challenges could be addressed effectively when countries recognized their shared interests in protecting their citizens and promoting beneficial innovation. The success of gaming regulation provided a template for addressing other technology governance challenges that transcend national boundaries. From artificial intelligence development to social media platform accountability to financial technology oversight. Perhaps most significantly, the gaming transformation revealed the power of evidence-based policymaking that incorporated insights from psychology, economics, neuroscience, and technology design. The interdisciplinary collaboration that characterized both the research foundation and policy development phases demonstrated that effective technology governance required expertise from multiple domains working together toward shared goals. The consumer advocacy movement that catalyzed the gaming transformation illustrated how organized civic engagement could create accountability for powerful technology companies and influence policy development even in complex, technical domains. The success of gaming advocacy provided models for citizen participation in technology governance that continue to inform democratic engagement with emerging technologies. The business model innovations that emerged during the adaptation period demonstrated remarkable creativity and resilience within the technology industry when regulatory constraints were properly designed. Rather than stifling innovation, consumer protection requirements catalyzed the development of sustainable business models that created genuine value for consumers while maintaining profitability for companies. The research conducted during and after the gaming transformation generated unprecedented insights about the relationship between technology design and human welfare. The natural experiment created by the regulatory changes provided evidence about psychological, social, and economic impacts of different technology approaches that continues to inform policy decisions across numerous sectors. The cultural impact of the gaming transformation extended far beyond the gaming community itself, influencing broader social attitudes toward technology, consumer rights, and corporate responsibility. The transformation helped establish new baseline expectations for how technology companies should relate to their users and how governments should protect citizens in digital environments. The economic analysis of the gaming transformation challenged conventional assumptions about the relationship between regulation and market efficiency. The evidence that consumer protection measures could simultaneously improve market outcomes and increase overall economic welfare provided compelling support for proactive technology governance across other sectors. The technological innovations developed in response to regulatory requirements proved broadly applicable across the digital economy. Solutions for algorithmic transparency, vulnerability protection, fair pricing, and ethical AI developed for gaming found applications in numerous other industries, accelerating the development of ethical technology practices throughout the economy. The international policy frameworks that emerged from gaming regulation provided institutional foundations for addressing other global technology challenges. The governance mechanisms, enforcement strategies, and cooperation protocols developed for gaming continue to inform international efforts to govern artificial intelligence, social media platforms, and other emerging technologies. Looking forward from our perspective in 2035, the Great Microtransaction Correction appears not as an isolated regulatory success, but as a crucial milestone in humanity's learning process about how to govern technology for human benefit. The transformation demonstrated that societies could collectively decide how technology should develop and enforce those decisions through effective international cooperation and regulatory design. The ongoing challenges that remain: keeping pace with technological change, ensuring global implementation equity, addressing new forms of digital manipulation, maintaining international coordination, require sustained attention and continued innovation in governance approaches. However, the foundation established through gaming regulation provides both practical tools and conceptual frameworks for addressing these challenges. The transformation also revealed important insights about the pace and nature of beneficial social change in the digital age. The gaming industry's rapid adaptation to new regulatory requirements demonstrated that technology companies could modify their practices quickly when faced with clear expectations and effective enforcement. This experience suggested that proactive policymaking could prevent many potential problems rather than simply responding to harm after it occurred. The role of academic research in supporting effective policy development proved crucial throughout the transformation. The intersection of rigorous empirical analysis with practical policy implementation created a feedback loop that continuously improved both understanding and governance approaches. This model of evidence-based technology governance continues to inform policy development across numerous domains. The gaming transformation ultimately demonstrated that technology governance was not primarily a technical challenge, but a social and political one. The tools and knowledge necessary for ethical technology development largely existed. What was required was the collective will to implement changes that prioritized human welfare alongside innovation and economic development. As we continue to navigate the ongoing evolution of digital technology and its impacts on human society, the Great Microtransaction Correction provides both inspiration and practical guidance. It demonstrated that seemingly intractable problems could be solved through sustained effort, international cooperation, and commitment to evidence-based policymaking. The transformation reminds us that technology is not an autonomous force that shapes society according to its own logic, but rather a set of tools and systems that can be designed and governed to serve human values and priorities. The gaming industry's journey from exploitation to ethics illustrates our collective capacity to shape technology's development in directions that support human flourishing. In our contemporary digital environment of 2035, we can observe the lasting benefits of this transformation in the gaming experiences available to players worldwide. Experiences that respect player agency, provide fair value, protect vulnerable individuals, and contribute positively to mental health and social relationships. These benefits extend beyond gaming to influence technology design across numerous sectors, creating a digital environment that serves rather than exploits human needs. The Great Microtransaction Correction thus stands as a testament to what becomes possible when societies commit to governing technology according to principles of transparency, fairness, vulnerability protection, and genuine value creation. It provides a model for continued efforts to ensure that technological advancement serves human flourishing in all its dimensions, creating the foundation for the ethical technology ecosystem that characterizes our world today. As you reflect on this history and perhaps drift toward rest, consider how this transformation demonstrates our collective capacity to create positive change even in complex, globalized systems. The gaming industry's journey from predatory practices to ethical innovation reminds us that technology can be reshaped to serve human welfare when we commit to evidence-based analysis, international cooperation, and sustained advocacy for consumer protection and human dignity. The Great Microtransaction Correction of 2035 stands as one of the early examples of successful global technology governance, providing both practical tools and enduring inspiration for continued efforts to ensure that technological advancement serves human flourishing. Its legacy continues to guide our approach to emerging technologies, reminding us that with thoughtful analysis, collaborative effort, and commitment to ethical principles, we can shape technology's development to support the kind of society we wish to create and inhabit. If you found this exploration valuable, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of this historical transformation do you find most relevant to our contemporary technology challenges? How might the lessons learned from gaming regulation apply to other areas of digital governance? Your engagement helps build the kind of thoughtful community discussion that was essential to the advocacy efforts that made the Great Microtransaction Correction possible. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most significant consumer protection achievements of the early 21st century. May your own rest be peaceful, and may you wake refreshed to engage thoughtfully with the technology that surrounds us, armed with the knowledge that positive change remains possible when we work together toward shared goals of human welfare and technological wisdom. If you enjoy this type of content, a like or a subscription is always appreciated. It helps our small corner of the internet grow. I invite you to share your own thoughts in the comments below.